Hey guys, Mini Soten here. You'll notice that this is a re-upload of this video that I posted a little under 3 weeks ago. When I uploaded it, I did not have any copyright claims. Everything was good to go. But since then, I got an email from YouTube saying that the video was taken down due to, I'm assuming, just new, automated copyright claims. I tried to dispute the claims. They got immediately ignored by Kadokawa. Japan, if you don't know, doesn't have any fair use laws. I feel like my use of Gimai Seiktasu has been transformative enough and substantive enough to warrant having that kind of footage as B-roll in the background. I really tried getting this section in for the last episode, and eventually I tried as much as I could to try and distort and warp it. So it wasn't picked up by copyright, even though I don't know how legal that is. But eventually I just took it out to comply because I wanted to get the video up, and it was working. It was great. I love the response and the feedback I got from it. So anybody who has previously watched it and wanted to come back and watch it again, thank you a ton for all the comments and likes that you left. It really means a lot. I put hundreds of hours into that video, and it's unfortunate to see that it got taken down the way it did. And I tried trimming out a few different sections to see if it would do anything, but there was just I wasn't happy with how it looked once it was trimmed. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to re-upload it and put an overlay of my typical animated background in the it's overlapping it basically. So you'll notice that some parts, especially at the beginning of the video, it does loosen up. There isn't as much towards the middle. But the beginning of the video, there is quite a lot that is just going to be the animated background. And it might jump between some of the episodes of the animated background. Even as I'm recording this, I don't know if I re-upload it, if there's going to be new copyright claims. There was, if you don't know how the copyright claim system works, I didn't really know until I started making this video and had to deal with it a lot, is that it shows you a specific section of the video that it deems as copyright claim. But when you try to edit that section, I didn't know this until I tried trimming it out. When you go to click the trim button, there's actually a ton more sections that it claims. So in the ones that it shows in the actual copyright claim isn't one of the sections that it wants you to trim out. It's very strange. It's very confusing. So yeah. Long rant aside, I am re-uploading this. I'm unfortunate because I really wanted to keep the statistics and the comments of the last video. So again, if you are rewatching this, I would appreciate you re-liking, re-commenting, re-sharing to get this video out. But at the same time, maybe you shouldn't, because if it gets popular again, even though the only one got, I don't know, it was 1,700 views. If it gets popular enough, maybe more copyright claims come in, and I don't want to have to deal with this again. But yeah, that's really it for me. Again, I appreciate everyone who's been supporting the channel. I do have a few new videos that I'm working on right now. One that I'm hoping to get out within the next week or two that I think should be pretty interesting, completely different from an anime video essay. But yeah. That's it for me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. And yeah, thanks. If there was an anime this year that I didn't expect to captivate and move me in such a way, it definitely wasn't the one titled Days with My Stepsister. And to be fair, it is a bit of a poor translation, or at least not the one I would have chosen for the English name of the series. The series in Japanese is titled
Gimai Seikatsu.
Gimai in Japanese translates to stepsister or sister-in-law in English, and Seikatsu translates to life or lifestyle. So in reality, the series should probably have been named Life with My Stepsister, or if they wanted to get creative, Life with My New Family, or something along those lines. Titles like these, I think, help better conceive what the actual premise of the show is, at least in my opinion. But with how prevalent the connotation of the word stepsister is with adult content, any use of it in any way is bound to detract some people as they write it off as just another run-of-the-mill ecchi or softcore hentai type of anime. Which is unfortunate because Gimai Seiktasu is one of the most well-directed and well-written shows of the year, and I don't think enough people are talking about it. Recently, I've been going on a bit of a tear with the slice of life type anime. For those who don't know, the slice of life genre centers around realistic portrayals of people and their lives and how stories would quote-unquote realistically play out if they were to happen in real life. And for the most part, they're entertaining. It's nice to watch something a little bit more relaxed and slower paced compared to shonen and seinen shows every once in a while. However, one thing that has constantly bugged me about slice of life anime is that even though it captures some parts of what life would actually be like, it still feels inauthentic or fake. The storylines are very repetitive from one to another. There's usually some love triangle between the new girl and childhood best friend. There's a beach episode, and it ends with a firework festival. But the thing that bugs me the most is the contrived dialogue that is used in basically every show. Characters over-exaggerate themselves in ways that are beyond how a normal conversation would play out. And after watching so many, I can understand why Japanese people don't want others to learn how to speak Japanese from anime. It's just unnatural. I may sound like I'm hating on the slice of life genre by pointing out these flaws, but trust me, I really do like a lot of these shows. Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, Horimiya, Love is War, Violet Evergarden, The Pet Girl of Sakuruso, A Silent Voice, I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. All of these and more are brilliant in their own ways, and I've enjoyed watching every one of them. Not Origaru though, that shit is mid. The point I'm trying to make is that on my journey to find the one anime that really captivated that feeling of realism, I stumbled upon Gimai Seiktasu, which was releasing during the summer 2024 season. And I figured, why not? I'll give it a shot. And I can thank myself for doing so, because as of now, it's been by far my favorite anime of the year, until ReZero Season 3 takes its place. Now, going into this project, I didn't exactly know what or how I was going to do it. The premise of the show derives from the parents of Yuta Asumura and Saki Ayase getting married to each other after divorcing their former partner. Yuta and Saki now find themselves living together, trying to navigate their new lives with a new sibling and a new parent. And sure, that seems simple enough on paper, but there's so much more that goes on that's added through the music, direct and indirect imagery, metaphors, dialogue, and more, that I didn't exactly know how I was going to fit it all into one video. I thought about splitting it up, but I felt that would detract too much from wanting to showcase all my feelings about the show. So what I ended up deciding was going through each episode scene by scene and commentating on what happens along with my thoughts. Is this the best or most efficient way to communicate to an audience? Probably not. But this is my first time creating a project that's on such a grand size. I figured if I'm going to do it, I might as well go all out and let people watching decide if they like it or not. Additionally, the author of the light novel series, Ghost Mikawa, wrote his own personal commentary after each episode aired, something super rare you don't often see. But I figured it'd be a good idea to add in his episode responses as well to get a bit more insight in behind the scenes straight from the author himself. Alright, without further ado, let's jump right in. Episode 1 is titled, I'm Home with a Stranger. The series begins with the back and forth inner thoughts between our two protagonists, contemplating on what a step-sibling of the opposite gender means to them. And right away, in Yuta's first lines, he plays into and is self-aware of what the connotation of what a stepsister in modern media is like. The non-blood related excuse is used so often solely for the reason that the female step-sibling becomes the main love interest of the male protagonist of the series. And I think that light novel series author Ghost Mikawa is brilliant for addressing this immediately. When I first watched this episode, I was impressed and confused at the same time, because not only did I think that the show wouldn't address something like this, but they did it so directly and within the first few minutes of airtime. Notice as well the advertisement on the bus that passes by, and it translates to, "I'm in love with my stepsister." Yet again, hitting directly on the nose the weird fetishization, particularly in Japanese media, with the taboo of step-sibling romance. I may seem like I'm exaggerating this all a little bit too much, but truly, I didn't think a story in Japanese media, with all of the pre-existing tropes in mind, would be so on the nose. But I could tell moving forward, I would have to pay much closer attention to what was going to happen, because series director Sota Ueno was cooking. But I'll stay a little bit calmer.
創作世界にあるような出来事と現実は違う。
Bro, is this show reading my mind? Did Ghost Mikawa probe my inner thoughts? What is going on? Okay, I promise I'm chill now. But we aren't even 2 minutes in, and this show is already like 3 layers of meta deep. What an amazing intro with amazing direction, music, and dialogue. This is how you capture an audience with a slice of life anime. I love the moment when Yuta and Saki pass by each other in the crowd. Just 2 strangers you'd never expect to see again ever in your life. They each go about their day not knowing the immense change that is about to happen. Now, I know in my introduction, I kept berating a lot of slice of life shows about their unrealistic portrayals of what life is actually like. And if there's any part of Gimai Seiktasu that falls into this stereotype or critique, it would be the beginning of the show. I'm not sure if it's different in Japanese culture, but just announcing to your kid out of the blue that you plan on getting married, and then on top of that, they'll be moving into your house, and you'll have a new step-sibling your same age that's a different gender, it would literally turn anyone's life upside down. But Yuta just thinks of it as another normal Tuesday. Like his dad just told him the weather or something. I know it's not super relevant to the story, but it did kind of throw me a little bit through the loop of how nonchalant this conversation was. One aspect I do like about this scene, however, is the parts not about the conversation. It's the words and actions that fill in the world with that realism element. The part where Tachi grabs his food out of the microwave and says that it's hot and burns himself multiple times is subtle. And it may not mean much, but it's something that I could absolutely see my dad doing while we're having a conversation. Once they meet, Yuta and Saki have some more platonic banter with each other, which again is written very much how an introductory conversation I think would go. And then we get to the scene outside, where Saki states,
私はあなたに何も期待しないから。あなたも私に何も期待しないでほしいの。
This dialogue took me a little bit to figure out. I'm not exactly sure what she was trying to insinuate here originally, but I think Occam's razor can tell us that she just wants to interact like regular people, and leave the weirdness out of the now being step-siblings aside. She wants to leave the family dynamic and expectations alone. Yuta responds that he is relieved, for the first time tonight actually, which begins to show the similarities of the two early on, how that they were both nervous about how to interact with each other, and mutually agree to the same terms. We then move into a scene where Tachi is cleaning their home and is nervous before Saki and Akiko arrive. It's charming to see how much he cares for his soon-to-be new family. Akiko is equally as cute by bringing in a ton of new things to her new house and thanking them for their hospitality. She then comments on the citrusy scent left. Even though they aren't the main point of the show, I really love both Tachi and Akiko. They both seem like very cool and loving parents. We then get to the scene where Yuta introduces Saki to her new room. We find out that her and Akiko's living conditions weren't ideal in their old apartment. They had opposite schedules as Akiko worked the night shift, so they both slept in the same bed, but at opposite times and rarely saw each other. There's an interesting back and forth between the two on why Yuta talks so formally to Saki. It's almost too polite and a bit abnormal to her. Yuta responds by dropping said formal language. He responds by saying, "It might be tough for me to treat you the same as a close friend, but I appreciate you being real with me and keeping things simple. It's easier for me too." Saki begins to tell Yuta how she told her friends about her situation with having a new stepbrother and how to navigate it, but they wouldn't take her seriously. And in response, she cut ties with all but one of them. The last scene encapsulates the uniqueness and strangeness of Yuta and Saki's predicament. Not often do parents get remarried, and then you end up with a step-sibling of the same age and opposite gender. It makes sense it would not only be a difficult situation to navigate, but one where people wouldn't really be able to relate in. Which is why Saki takes such hard repercussions against her friends when they don't take her seriously when she asks for help. Yuta does the right thing by being formal and polite, but for Saki, she'd much rather prefer she's treated like another family member or a friend instead of a guest, which makes a lot of sense. The following scene, Yuta again shows his politeness by offering to pretend like he doesn't know Saki if they see each other, since they go to the same school. Saki originally responds that she doesn't mind, but then changes to say that it is probably better that they don't act like they know each other, implying something deeper is at play. However, we don't know what that is because Yuta is called in to work. Yuta converses with his coworker about his current circumstances. He acknowledges that Saki is traditionally very good looking. His coworker, Shiori, plays into this by jokingly suggesting that something might happen between the two of them, which Yuta quickly rebukes. Yuta confesses that he has had thoughts like that, but he knows that he shouldn't, and it's stressing him out. He's confused on how he should act around her, since they're technically now siblings, but they have been strangers for the past 17 years. This again seems like a very normal and rational response from Yuta. Obviously, he is a hormonal teenager, and now there's a girl his same age living down the hall from him. He's bound to have some impure thoughts, but he is smart enough and mature enough to know he can't act on them, which is a theme that is discussed later on. The final two parts of the episode I want to talk about are the scenes with the bath and the lights. Yuta is the first to take a bath at the end of the night, and before letting Saki get in after him, he drains it, fills it, and heats it again with new water. This act again shows the kind nature of Yuta, which Saki notices, a detail which may have slipped by some watchers. In a family where you've lived together for so long and are comfortable around each other, it may be normal to reuse the same bathwater to wash multiple people so as not to be wasteful. And even though Saki told Yuta to treat him like any normal family member, he still goes out of his way to give her new bathwater to hopefully subdue any subconscious nervousness or awkwardness she may have had about bathing in the same water. Again, a very subtle detail with no dialogue associated with it, so you have to watch and pay attention to get it. But once you do, it makes all the more sense. The last part, which I love that they added in, is the scene where Saki is flipping on and off the lights to find out which switch does what. It's super wholesome and relatable, and adds upon the idea of her being in a new environment that she has to learn about. Again, it's a small and subtle detail, but it adds a ton of charm and character to this show that I love. And that ends episode 1. And honestly, the reason why I put so many scenes of episode 1 in and analyze them is because so many of them are so important and add a ton of depth to the story. It honestly was harder to find which scenes to leave out. Some may call the show a bit too melancholic, but I believe slow burns like this have a super strong payoff in the end. And as I mentioned before, after the airing of each episode, Ghost Mikawa gives some commentary about the episode on his Twitter, and I wanted to share a few of his thoughts and statements below. But if you wanted to read along, I'm going to link a Reddit mega thread in the description that gives links to each of the r/anime discussions of each episode, the r/Gimai Seiktasu discussion threads of each episode, and then links to each of Ghost's commentaries on each episode as well. So if you want to read along, you can click on the link in the description. It was interesting that he wrote that he thought that some people were going to think that this was going to end up to be a romantic comedy. He then writes that the goal of his work is not to show love or comedy, but bring out the lives of characters as they are. He also states that he didn't want the charm of the 2D world, the anime, to be lost in trying to make it as close to the 3D world, the real world, which I will admit is very thought-provoking. Ghost obviously wants a good anime adaptation and wants it to remain accurate to how he wrote his light novel, but he also wants the animation team at Kadokawa to interpret it in their own way. A mixture of keeping the charm of how anime looks and feels, while maintaining the realism of how he writes, which I think they absolutely nailed. He also writes how he doesn't believe that there is currently a genre out there that fits the story he's trying to tell. But he and his editor decided to serialize Gimai Seiktasu under the genre of a romantic life novel. Ghost goes on to say that a first-time reader who reads only a bulleted list of the plot developments may not understand why this work has so many supporters. That's because the core of the appeal lies in the detailed actions of daily life, the detailed expressions, and the overall reading experience, rather than in the plot developments that can be expressed in bullet points. Ghost also recounts an interesting story, talking with the director of the show, and how he stated that he thought it was difficult to adapt properly, which Ghost said he felt half sorry for, but also half relieved, that he felt that it was going to be difficult to adapt because it meant that it was proof that he read the story and got the message Ghost was trying to get across, which he greatly valued. He then goes on to give a bit more insight on the characters of Yuta and Saki, giving them a bit more context on who and why they are the people that they are. I think it's important to give the full context of what he wrote, so I'm going to read it here. I use Google Gemini to translate it, so there might be a few words or phrases that are incorrect, but you'll get the picture. Yuta and Saki's characterization and how they met, as those who have watched it already, feel these two are incredibly logical and troublesome people, especially in human relationships. Both of them witnessed and experienced the breakdown of their parents' relationship firsthand. For example, one person might perceive something the other person did out of consideration as malicious, or blame the other person for not being able to understand a feeling that cannot be understood. The two of them, who often stood in a neutral position between two people who were in conflict and at odds, had a visceral realization of the importance of human relationships. They feel bias and ugliness in human beings, such as placing unilateral expectations on others, getting hurt for no reason, and hurling abuse. Yuta and Saki are such people. If you were to categorize them by typical character attributes, you could describe them as cool. But in fact, if you describe them as cool, your interpretation of the two of them would be slightly off. They're basically cold-blooded and don't raise their voices very often. However, it doesn't mean that they have few emotional ups and downs, or that they are laid back and inconsiderate. Therefore, they try to be friendly to people they meet for the first time. And this is also shown in the conversation between the two of them at the time of their meeting. Although Saki, who is the same kind of person, saw through the lack of enthusiasm in her humor. Yuta has basically been living in society by blending in with this moderate distance, not going too far, not rejecting too much, not being too playful, and not being too stiff. This is a communication that is less likely to make enemies because it doesn't expect too much from others. Conversely, Saki, while having the same sensibility of not expecting too much from others, has chosen to isolate herself by rejecting people who seek the subtleties of human relationships from the beginning. However, she only does this communication when it is solely her own problem. She has a sensibility of thinking that she is fine alone and that it is okay for everyone else to hate her. But at the same time, she cares for her mother, Aki, more than anyone else, and doesn't want to do anything that would be detrimental to Aki. Therefore, she also tries to be as friendly as possible to Taichi, the man Aki loves, and Yuta, who will become part of the family. That's why she deliberately puts on a smile that she doesn't show at school or even during their first meeting. She vaguely thinks that if she can secure Aki's place by pretending to be friendly for the remaining 2 years until she graduates from high school, she will then quietly distance herself and live alone to avoid any trouble. She became a family member with such subtle feelings that she doesn't want to expect anything from a male family, but she didn't want to reject and hurt other people either. When they were alone, Saki deliberately showed Yuta her cool side because she felt something similar in him. She felt the possibility of spending her future family life with the same stance as him. And as a kind of gamble, she showed him a little of her backside. And when Yuta turned out to be the expected person, she contracted with him. Ghost ends his post with his thoughts on the animation. He points out that some scenes are anime originals, but he says that these scenes certainly would have fit into the original light novel as well, and that the director and staff picked up on what he forgot he should have written in. He continues to compliment the animation by writing how he approves of all techniques used to bring Gimai Seiktasu to life. From the sounds, breathing, and natural speaking of the voice actors, he enjoyed it all. He even has a paragraph writing about how he wanted viewers to pay attention to all the details, like in the scenes where Taichi tells Yuta he's going to remarry while making breakfast, which I felt extreme vindication for, because I only read his post after writing out my script. I noticed, Ghost. I noticed. Ghost seems to feel extremely proud and happy with how his light novel got adapted, and from reading his post, I have secondhand pride for him, if that's a thing. He clearly cares a lot about this story, and seemed to be very worried originally that no studio would be able to adapt it properly. But the result was the best scenario possible. Episode 2, titled A Deal and a Fried Egg, picks up the morning after the previous night. Saki acknowledges the kindness of Yuta filling a new bath, but tells him not to do it again because it's a waste of water. This shows the improving trust Saki has with Yuta because she's willing to share the same bathwater. We then get to the phenomenal opening song of the series, Tenshi Tachi no Uta, performed by Fana. Tenshi Tachi no Uta translates to Tensei's Song, which means Song of Rebirth or Reincarnation Song, which is a fitting title given the circumstances of what this story is about. Right after, before getting to Yuta, we overhear the background conversation between two students talking about a horror movie. Again, I might be beating a dead horse or oblivious to this type of dialogue in other anime, but I just really love the sounds of a real conversation happening in the background. Small things like this just add up to make it a more immersive experience. Maru, Yuta's friend, proceeds to have a conversation about Saki as he notices Yuta looking at her from a distance. Maru comments on how he shouldn't go after Saki, as it would make him look bad. He's heard rumors that Saki is basically a prostitute. She's reserved, doesn't fit in with her class, dyes her hair, has multiple earrings, and apparently people have seen her leave the hotel district. Yuta rebuttals with Maru not being the type to believe in rumors, and Maru responds by saying that a basketball player asked Saki out, and she responded with, "I'm just as bad as the rumors say," confirming all of them herself. This scene sets up more backstory for Saki that we weren't aware of. Yuta alludes to this as being Pandora's box, interestingly enough. And again makes it known that no one else besides Yuta and Saki know that they're now step-siblings. Although it was kind of alluded to already in episode 1, the idea of Yuta and Saki being very similar in terms of self-philosophy and mindset becomes more apparent. They both chose tennis as the sport to play because they both hate relying on others as they would in a team sport. Saki even comments on how they really do think alike. The scene where Saki asks Yuta about a job took me a few rewatches to understand what the dialogue is really talking about. Saki tells Yuta that she read that if you want to make good money, you should sell yourself. Now, most people would probably think that she's referring to the idea of someone being self-reliant and selling their talent or skill in order to make money. But Yuta, and now the audience, upon hearing the rumors about Saki, initially perceived this as Saki saying she needs to sell her body in order to make money. Yuta makes this mistake without thinking twice about her possibly implying it's an analogy, to which she corrects him and he apologizes. The following scene, where they have dinner together, also speaks volumes to their reaction to this type of mess-up. Yuta is obviously embarrassed and wants to swiftly apologize, but to Saki, it isn't that big of a deal. She knows the rumors about her and doesn't seem to care about dismissing them either. She's well aware of why people think that about her as well, all the reasons Maru gave. Saki then gives a bit more backstory about her mother, how she only graduated high school. She asks Yuta if this bothers him, to which he replies that it doesn't. Saki explains how his response is different compared to most. She's heard many times from behind her and her mother's back rumors about her mother. How she's probably dumb, but she's beautiful and works the nightlife, so she's probably an escort. Yuta replies how that's nonsense, and Saki perks up and exclaims the same, almost as if she's been waiting for anyone to give that same response. She then goes into a lot of the stereotypes women face today, which are entirely true. If a woman is smart but ugly, she can be seen as snobby or uptight. But if they're dumb and beautiful, they're just a gold digger or using their body to get ahead. This is the reason she gives to dress the way she does. Less modest and stands out compared to other girls at her prep school. She needs to look perfect before she has the strength to act perfect. She wants to prove everyone wrong, that she can both be beautiful and smart without having to rely on anyone. Saki presses Yuta on the question if he is similar to her. She can tell that deep down he doesn't want to rely on anyone either. Yuta reflects on this without giving an answer, and instead asking if this mindset is the reason why she's looking for a job. He offers to inquire with his coworker about opportunities, which Saki thanks him for, but doesn't want him to do everything for her. Again, nailing in this idea that Saki wants to be independent and not rely on anyone. Yuta compromises by asking Saki to make him miso soup as payment, to which she agrees. The next morning, she even goes above and beyond by making breakfast for both Yuta and Taichi. At work, Shiori counters Yuta's self-reliant ideology by suggesting the idea that if you're unable to be self-reliant, it's okay to rely on others. This clashing of philosophy is again another theme that is commonly brought up during the course of the anime. Yes, it might be good to be independent, and at the same time, it isn't bad to rely on others occasionally. Yuta is coming to this realization more quickly and starting to accept it rather than Saki is, even if she does agree with it, like she mentions to Yuta. Saki remarks that it would be easier to be self-reliant if Yuta and his father were terrible people. She explains how it would be easier if they were both mean to her, which would only fuel her decision for self-reliance that much further. But because they aren't, because she sees kindness in both of them, it makes it that much more difficult to buy into the notion that she has to do everything herself. And not only that, but it implies that she does genuinely like and care for them, and possibly could rely on them in the future. I really like this section of dialogue, because it puts Saki at a crossroads with her own philosophy. She has two choices: either rely on others or rely on only herself. Before, when she only lived with her mother after her parents' divorce, her option was clear because there was no other outside force acting on or influencing her. But now, after meeting Yuta and Taichi, seeing how good people they are, and seeing how much Saki and Yuta have in common, it raises questions about how much independence she really needs. But if the scenario were different, and Yuta and Taichi both turned out to be mean and horrible people, like she mentioned, it would only fuel her drive that much more, and confirming her idea that no one would help anyone out of the goodness of their heart. Or at least, no one would help her. The idea of Yuta's kindness is actually seen firsthand as well, when Yuta saves Saki's life from a truck coming at her while she's crossing the street. This may have been a true wake-up call for Saki, now finally realizing that even if she thinks she can do everything on her own, having someone there to watch her back could save her life. And like after the airing of last episode, Ghost released another Twitter post describing his thoughts with episode 2. It should be noted that he writes how his commentary is only from his point of view, and makes sure to emphasize that it isn't necessarily the correct one, as the director may have had a different intention than he did while writing. He also made sure to state that his interpretation isn't meant to define how us, the viewers, should enjoy the anime. To him, his posts are meant to be enjoyed as a subcontext for those who want to read and understand the work on a deeper level. Ghost continues to write how some people may have thought that the episode was a little confusing or difficult to understand. He then goes into details about the original intention of Gimai Seiktasu. He writes, "The core appeal of Gimai Seiktasu lies in the very fact that it depicts the ironclad structure of a romantic comedy in which you have to live with your stepsister in an extremely realistic and precise way. And in the process of searching for this realistic expression, we dare not to do one thing that is important in romantic comedies. That is, to make the heroine's emotions clear. When I write romantic comedies, I often write them in such a way that the reader can only recognize that the heroine is embarrassed, angry, or sad in this scene. Even when I describe an emotion that is somewhat difficult to understand, I structure it so that the reason for the emotion or action is revealed as soon as possible. However, in Gimai Seiktasu, I dared to write in such a way that we don't know clearly what Saki is thinking until the very end. Why do I do that? It is because Gimai Seiktasu is a personal novel about a fictional character, and the author places great importance on a sense of reality. The novel version is basically told from the first-person perspective of Asumura Yuta, but I chose the first person not as a technique, but as a result of a thorough investigation into, if Asumura Yuta were a real person, what kind of flow of thought and description would be most realistic. Even in first person, it is possible to write in such a way that the emotions of other characters are clearly conveyed to the reader. In fact, in other works, I have used such a writing style. However, this was not the case in Gimai Seiktasu. The fact that, from my point of view, I don't know what the other person is really thinking, is itself one of the propositions that I had to depict in Gimai Seiktasu, which is why I had to write it in such a way that in Yuta's POV, and the reader's POV as well, that he doesn't know what Saki is thinking. Of course, that alone does not make a novel, so we have prepared an answer part at the end of the first volume. It is kind of a service to the reader to show Saki's true feelings, which Yuta does not know. Why did Saki say that thing at that time? Why did Saki do that thing at that time? Was unknown from Yuta's point of view, as it is told through a certain gimmick. It's kind of like a mystery to be answered. The key to the original novel was to elaborate on things that are very common in the real world, such as the mystery of human relationships and the fact that one event can be interpreted a different way from a different person's perspective. He also gives commentary on some of the scenes within the anime, and gives a bit more context and background. I'm not going to go in depth on each one he listed, but I do want to talk about a few. He states that some dialogue from the light novel was cut out during the dinner scene between Yuta and Saki. The dialogue in question dealing with Yuta listing some of the prejudices men tend to be subjugated with, to which Saki expresses sympathy for. He states the reason why this was cut was due to trying to focus more on Saki's feelings towards Yuta, and that it was an aspect he wanted to really emphasize on. Plus, there were time restraints that wouldn't have allowed it. Ghost then comments that Saki looking for a quick, high-paying job is an error in her nature. He goes on to say that it is short-sighted to look for one, but in her case, the need for one came from the process of thinking and searching for a practical way to embody her ideals. He then writes that it is ironic for Saki, as someone that doesn't want to be gossiped about, but by choosing the path that she feels is right, she gets closer to being more involved with the stuff that gets you gossiped about, which I think is very powerful and a profound message and brilliant coming from Ghost. He also writes about the scene where Saki says that she will make miso soup for Yuta every day. According to Ghost, saying, "I will make miso soup for you every day," is a traditional metaphor for a proposal, because miso soup is associated with home cooking. Since Yuta's parents' divorce, he has hardly had homemade miso soup, and he unconsciously felt a sense of affection and soothing by the idea of having homemade miso soup. This is even further emphasized by the flashback scene where you see Yuta drinking instant miso soup at the dinner table with his mother. I didn't pick up on this originally, but now, after reading Ghost's commentary, it just makes sense. Even with his mother, a figure who would traditionally make homemade miso soup, he never got that homemade affectional treatment. He still got the instant, microwavable stuff. Another amazing detail added by the anime. Ghost writes how it was an anime original and not even in his light novel, too. The final scene Ghost comments on is the one where Saki is almost hit by a truck, to which he states that it was greatly condensed down from the light novel. He writes how the question of why Saki didn't see it coming, what's the conversation she and Yuta had afterwards, are left to the interpretation of the viewer. He wrote that if he were to talk about it too in-depth, it would spoil episode 3. But the intention is still there, and the way it's presented is deliberate. The reason why it's put at the end of the episode is to build up on the effects that Yuta has had on Saki, as we saw all throughout episode 2. Episode 3 is titled Reflection and Revision, and it's one of my favorite episodes as well. It opens up with a conversation at breakfast where Yuta offers to do the family's laundry. After not picking up on the hint about Saki and Akiko's laundry and how they have certain delicate fabrics, Saki uses this as ammo to tease him, poking fun at the obviously untrue possibility that he likes to cross-dress. And again, during this conversation, Yuta doesn't realize what Saki is talking about. She even implies that he must be getting his eyebrows done professionally for how good they look, and she's jealous. I really like this scene because it opens us up to a bit more towards Saki and how she isn't one-dimensional and bland for wanting to be independent. She has a humorous side and can do sarcasm very well, which I think fits perfectly with her character. Now, one thing I don't think enough people have picked up on or have pointed out is the humor in this show. Granted, it's very dry and subtle, but when you understand it and know it's happening, it is very funny. The conversation between Yuta and Saki walking to school in the ring during episode 3 highlights this type of comedy. This conversation eventually leads them into discussing their opinions on gender roles. And notice how well this transitions. Both parts of these conversations are like two sides of the same coin. The coin in this case being gender. It starts by making fun of, again in a lighthearted way, about Yuta cross-dressing, merely because he doesn't understand the undertone of what Saki and Akiko were suggesting. Saki uses this oversight to introduce the idea that Yuta may like to cross-dress, while fake acting oblivious as if it were something that everyone were to talk about. But afterwards, once Yuta understands what Saki is implying, and they're on the same page, the tone shifts. Still on the topic of gender, but now with more nuance in their questions and seriousness in their response. This is an incredible shift, beautifully written by Ghost. The transition is so seamless it comes out of nowhere and just feels so natural. Saki opens the next part of the dialogue with the question, "Don't you think it's hard to force all sexual differences into just two categories?" A question which has had more thought put into it in modern times than really any other point in history. Saki seems to have thought a great deal about this, and we can tell from her conversation with Yuta during dinner about how women are perceived, if they're more smart or more beautiful. Saki wants to try and veer away from these norms by trying to be both smart and beautiful. The one area so far that we have seen her succeed in is her beauty. But to be fair, this is the easiest part to nail down, since it is all physical and always visible to anyone. The intelligence portion is something that is witnessed in action, or is earned, which so far in the story we haven't seen her showcase. But back to Saki's question. Yuta responds with a generic, "Yeah, I guess so," kind of answer. Now, I'm inclined to believe Yuta actually does agree with Saki's opinion, but was, 1, caught off guard by such a deep and introspective question, and 2, hadn't really given it much thought. This is probably the most polite answer he can give, which in fairness is fine, but Saki probably wanted something more substantial. She comments how before, during her humorous tease, the question she just posed didn't ever cross her mind. The humor in her teasing of Yuta is because men aren't supposed to cross-dress. It isn't typically considered a masculine trait or something quote-unquote manly. Yet, even though she doesn't believe all gender roles can fit into just two categories, she still complies with the notion and makes jokes at its expense, which, in all honesty, is a very powerful and mature introspective, something that begs the audience to ask themselves the same question. Yuta, as expected, kind of brushes her worries off. He understands now it was just her poking fun at him. He doesn't really see anything off about it. Saki thanks him for not taking it too seriously, but from her tone, it seems as though this dilemma bothers her more than she is letting on. That's why she immediately responds that she can't forgive herself, which is why she wanted to apologize. Yuta then states that, "Sometimes we do things reflexively, conditioned reflexes. Stuff we do or say that is so normal or natural because we do or say them so often." Yuta follows up by saying, sometimes these reflexes can be useful in certain situations. But Saki rebuttals that reflexes with prejudice in mind can lead to discrimination, which eludes her thoughts about self-reflection on gender roles she brought up previously. And Yuta simply responds with, "That's why we need to re-examine things," which stops Saki right in her tracks. Yuta, at this point, can tell that Saki is frustrated with what she did and how it differs from what she believes. He confronts her by saying, "Once you've reflected on your mistake, there's no need to keep worrying about it." He adds to it further by commenting how he doesn't believe she's someone who can't learn and reflect on what she's done in the past. The two share a brief moment together before Saki responds how he understands her too well. This whole sequence is one of my favorites from the entire season. You enter in with this playful banter, which seems nothing more than a friend making fun at another friend for being clueless on a topic, to then one of them opening up and sharing their true thoughts and feelings on how they are frustrated that they believe one thing but do another. It isn't until Yuta acknowledges Saki and validates her feelings, while at the same time letting her know not to worry as much as she is, that Saki can finally understand. Saki is genuinely bewildered about someone taking the time not to only understand her, but then giving genuine feedback and encouragement. It's something that she's never felt before in her life. It makes sense why Saki is confused and maybe a little disappointed that Yuta understands her too well, because again, it goes against her self-philosophy about being independent and not relying on anyone, when for the first time, she truly felt at ease with her thoughts while speaking to someone else. Saki then puts a test out for Yuta. She leaves her underwear hanging in plain view of her room with the door wide open, only to find Yuta staring at them in her doorway, catching him in the act. She then asks Yuta if he thought that she thought he was going to steal them, to which Yuta responds yes. It's clear he knows he's in the wrong and embarrassed in this situation, but Saki doesn't seem to be too upset at this. She tells Yuta how his eyes being drawn to her underwear is another kind of reflexive action, and how she also thinks he isn't someone who can't learn from what he's done in the past. This response from Saki relieves Yuta, but she also presses him a little further. Saki asks him if her underwear is tempting enough to catch his eye. Yuta responds seriously how he didn't say that, but Saki teases him by asking if it wasn't even a little tempting. This time, Yuta picks up on the joke. Saki then continues to press the issue by asking Yuta if the thought of stealing her underwear ever crossed his mind. Yuta responds honestly, saying that he would be lying if he said he had no urge to take it, but adds that just because he may have the urge doesn't mean he would act on it. Saki agrees with the sentiment and asks to drop the topic and leaves abruptly. This sequence can be a little off-putting, honestly. I understand the sentiment Ghost is trying to convey with the idea of thoughts and acts, and he goes as boldly to create a scenario with a brother and sister's underwear, which takes its ethical dilemmas to the extreme. However, when putting this in the context of Saki, who was clearly trying to test Yuta to see if he actually practiced what he preached, I'd say it fits well into her character. The next major sequence is the highlight of the entire season. 40 whole seconds of silence and a still frame while watching Yuta and Saki eat. Absolute kino. Now, one thing I think the series has struggled with a little bit is movement from scene to scene. After the underwear talk, we learn that Saki has been a bit more down than usual. It jumps from a few different quick random scenes of Yuta at school, in the stairwell, outside, and at work. He texts to ask Saki if anything has happened to her, to which she responds with no. Yuta then, during dinner, tries to have a casual conversation with Saki about trying to find her a job, but she gives a quick, sharp, one-word answer, clearly implying something we don't know is wrong with her. This eventually leads to Saki letting herself into Yuta's room while their parents are out, and she is dressed only in her underwear. This is the most extreme test Saki is putting Yuta through, to see if he will truly act on his desires. The text that flashes on screen reads, "Are you willing to buy my body?" Asking more or less indirectly, in this situation, will Yuta give in to his desires and have sex with her? Before we get to that resolution, we cut to a sequence of Saki's diary, depicting the past week from her eyes. She begins to say that she was relieved when they first met, because she knew immediately he wasn't a bad person, bringing up the example of him drawing her a new bath once he was finished. She does state that he was a little annoyed he believed the rumors about her, but can't really blame him. She then writes how this might be the first time anyone has understood her feelings so effortlessly. She asks herself how she can depend on people the right way, but dismisses it, because she feels it's impossible for her. Saki reflects on Yuta's comment, on the difference between having urges and acting on them, to which she completely agrees with. She adds that anytime Yuta shares his thoughts, it's something she can relate to completely. She ends her diary entry by writing that he is dangerous because he understands her far too well. We then snap back to the present with Saki on Yuta's bed. Yuta admonishes Saki by stating that she is acting exactly like the types of girls he hates, a woman that uses her looks to get ahead. He continues to scold her by saying he thought she didn't want to be seen this way. He then gives an extremely powerful message. If you can't prove people wrong in a way that's not contingent on being a woman, then what's the point? Yuta knew Saki was trying to test him, but he's disappointed she tried to win in a way that goes against her own beliefs. Saki wanted to see if Yuta would act on his urges to prove to herself that she couldn't rely on him. This ties back to one of their conversations they had earlier, where she said it'd be easier to be more independent if Yuta and his father were mean, because now she knows they're nice and she can rely on them, and it goes against her whole self-philosophy. At the same time, however, Saki, I think, also wanted Yuta to act on his urges and quote-unquote buy her body, because she was starting to fall for him. That's why she wrote down he was dangerous, because he's a risk of destroying her whole self-philosophy. In the end, Yuta made the right decision, while at the same time making Saki reflect on her actions, which has been the whole theme of this episode. Saki then opens up about her father, how he used to be nice, but began to distrust people after his company failed, calling Akiko a sex worker and using her body to get customers. This clearly took a toll on Saki, and expectedly so. Yuta then opens up about his mother, how she cheated on Yuta's father, which led him to become paranoid of women for a while. Saki then tells Yuta that they have a lot in common, bonding not only over their inner thoughts and feelings, but past trauma as well. Yuta tells Saki that although they may have broken parts about their lives, he still believes that they get along all right as brother and sister. Saki writes a final journal entry for the week, reflecting on how she can't start calling him Big Brother, or else she'll end up being dependent on him for everything. Although this is another jest, she clearly is already learning slowly but surely that it's okay to rely on others. The bombshell drops where, out of nowhere, in the middle of the credits, Saki writes how she has started to develop feelings for Yuta and not sure what to do next. This episode received a deserving 7,000-word commentary from Ghost, and I am all here for it. Ghost details how readers of the light novel will notice that the beginning of episode 3 is a diary insert. In the light novel, Ghost adds inserts of Saki's diary to supplement her thoughts into the manuscripts, since technically we only know the inner thoughts of Yuta, as he is the main character. The diary inserts act as a clever way of knowing what Saki is thinking, without breaking the current dynamic of how the anime is set up. He notes that the diary doesn't provide all the answers, as not everyone writes everything they're thinking of into the diary, and how we as the viewers need to combine Saki's actions with what she is writing to truly determine what type of person she is. He also states that due to the omniscience of certain scenes from the light novel in the anime, there is more room for interpretation left open for how to view Saki. Ghost then goes on to give a bit more detail about who Saki is. He describes her as someone who can be extremely cautious about things that often cause controversy, bringing up gender as an example, which can be seen as both righteous and neurotic. He also states that some people might find her as a strong-willed person, but she actually has no real ideology. He makes sure to mention that Saki is someone that doesn't like to be wrong. It's stubbornness due to her immaturity. We then get some more context of Yuta's mother. She was someone, according to Ghost, who had a lot of expectations of others and felt betrayed when those expectations weren't met. She was someone who had a lot of pent-up emotions that were accumulated over a long period of time. Ghost gives little sympathy towards her by writing that it can happen to anyone, and that the relationship failing isn't 100% her fault. He makes sure to explain as well that although Taichi wasn't completely blameless, like Yuta mentions, he still had done very little wrong. But from Yuta's mother's perspective, it was as if Taichi had continued to do terrible things throughout their entire relationship. Ghost moves on to give a bit more backstory about Taichi as well, stating that he was a salesman for a food manufacturer and made between 8 to 10 million yen a year, which may seem like good money, but for people living in Tokyo, it isn't that much. Because he worked long hours, he didn't have time to help around the house, and with money being tight, little by little, this dissatisfied Yuta's mother. Yuta was also apparently enrolled in a cram school while he was younger, but apparently wasn't very affluent to schoolwork, which disappointed Yuta's mother. In response to not being able to meet the expectations of his mother, Yuta began to study a lot at home so he wouldn't have to go to cram school. He is now quite smart and proficient at studying, but only does it as a way because he wanted to appease his mother, not because he actually wanted to do it himself. Ghost then explains that's why Yuta felt relief when Saki told him when they first met, "I have no expectations of you. I hope you don't have any expectations of me." Yuta was worried that by having a new sister, it meant he was going to have to appease to someone else, but Saki let him know that this wouldn't be the case. His commentary continues by pointing out a few sections of the light novel that were omitted from the anime, mainly dealing with Yuta's stay out of the way attitude. Yuta is someone who normally wouldn't interfere with people's private business. For example, in the light novel, he thinks to himself that if Saki does practice prostitution, why would it matter to him? If there is a supply and a demand, Saki doesn't mind, why should he? But to Ghost, this simply means that Yuta is thinking, I won't get involved as long as it's done in secrecy. But if Saki were to come out and say, I want to do prostitution, then Yuta would try to stop her and give her his thoughts. This mindset is broken, however, during the scene where Saki is almost hit by a truck. Viewers pointed out to Ghost that in the anime, the truck had a red light, and Saki had the crosswalking light on, meaning she could cross the street. Even though it wasn't her fault, and you can do everything correctly, Saki was still being careless, which is why Yuta scolded her, which goes against his normal behavior. Ghost does point out that this scene is a bit more difficult to understand in the anime rather than the light novel. Ghost then addresses the most important point of the episode, where Saki confronts Yuta in his room alone at night. He gives his thoughts as to what triggered Saki to do so. I'm going to read what he wrote, because again, I think it's important. 1. Saki is not that brilliant by nature. She needs to pull all her energy into her studies and wants to earn maximum money in the minimum amount of time. 2. Half-hearted advice of depending on others. 3. She understood the existence of Yuta's sexual desire. 4. The option of high-paying part-time job equaled prostitution was always on her mind. 5. She subconsciously hoped that even if Yuta caused a thing, it would not lead to a decisive breakdown of the relationship, and that he would calmly build up the relationship in the future. The above was roughly input into Saki's mind, and as a result of the logic that was built up in her mind, it led her to act. Point 1. It is expressed in the fact that she does not participate in PE class, and listens to English material on her way to school without fail. She honestly thinks Yuta is great because he balances his studies and part-time job, because she is still lacking in his excellent grades, and she believes that he must be excellent to begin with. Point 2. Saki does not yet understand the concept of relying on someone for free. Hence why she believes that even if she receives money from her family, she has to offer something. On top of that, as Yuta was gradually showing her how she could rely on him like a big brother, Saki was also gradually becoming unknowingly spoiled like a little sister, and the option of relying on Yuta came to mind. However, she couldn't interpret relying on him as relying on him gratis, and thought that she had to give something in return. Point 3. The thought in point 2 above and recognizing the existence of Yuta's sexual desire meshed fatally. If Yuta has sexual interest in Saki, it can be said that this living together situation will be something that he will be forced to endure, and an awkward moment may come one day. If that is the case, then she thought that if they were to form such a relationship with each other, the awkwardness would be only temporary. Yuta would be able to resolve his desires, and she would only have to spend an hour or so in the house to get money that Yuta would earn from working for hours. The value of what they provided would be balanced. In the original novel, Yuta says things like, "If you say that, then I want to be paid for the food." But Saki did not realize that was something for which she could only receive money. More precisely, Saki could not handle the guilt of accepting Yuta's time-earned money without going so far. Cooking is not difficult or painful for her. She felt that she had to dedicate something that involved difficulty and suffering to be balanced. This is also because Yuta wasn't a bad person. This is where the meaning of what she said last time, that she would have felt more comfortable if Yuta had been a bad person, rests. If she had been someone who didn't have to feel guilty about skimming off family finances, she could have told him to not do anything and ask to be paid in full cost of going to university. But you can't say that to two members of the Asumura family, or at least that's what Saki thinks. Point 4. The option of high-paying job equals prostitution was always something on Saki's mind. However, Saki is indeed not thinking only in terms of money efficiency. She understands that there are risks involved, so she's carefully considering whether she should take that risk or not. But if she had succeeded in doing this to Yuta, she probably would have gone to prostitute herself to other people. She would get used to it, and one day she would definitely realize that the amount of money is still not enough for just one person. It means that sometimes, after thinking things over and making a calm, rational decision, you can end up doing something that is generally not recommended. However, Yuta's clear rejection here has eliminated the future of her going down that path. Point 5. This is the part where Saki has unknowingly become misaligned. She has unknowingly held the expectation that Yuta, who sees her in a flat way, would understand everything and approve of Saki's actions. This is another thing that Saki expected from Yuta. She hoped that he would not try and break up the family, and he would keep a secret from their parents. Yuta cares for his father, Taichi. He is very depressed after his ex-wife's betrayal, and sees him as desperate. He is often appalled at his father's lack of self-confidence, his tallness, and the way he looks down his nose, but he's relieved to see his father's happy face. Including these aspects, he does not want to ruin that time. As for Akiko, she probably has been through a lot to get to where she is now. But seeing her happy and her smiling face, she thinks that this environment must be wonderful for both of them. And Yuta anticipated that Saki would be thinking the same thing. However, if Yuta and Saki were to have an impure relationship of domestic prostitution, if it were to become known to their parents, their happy faces would surely be clouded. It is an act that could lead to the breakup of the family. The reason why Saki initiated it, despite the fact that it was an act that could lead to the collapse of the current family, was because she hoped that Yuta would behave in a way that would prevent that from happening. But being controlled by expectations was what Yuta disliked most. This is the point of view Yuta condemned Saki's behavior for, by saying, "That's the type of person I hate most." Both Yuta and Saki misunderstood each other a little bit. Saki thinks Yuta would be fine with this. The slight assumption led to a fatal discrepancy. So they decided to talk a bit more about their parents' roots, and then they went on to talk about each other's separated parents. Ghost ends by stating that Yuta and Saki will only grow closer in the coming episodes. Episode 4 is titled Tendencies and Strategies, and it picks up 3 weeks later, 1 month after Yuta and Saki's parents have gotten married. The episode opens with a monologue from Yuta, which resembles his at the beginning of episode 1. However, this time, Yuta thinks to himself that his stepsister is no longer a stranger. He instead says that Saki occupies a much more ambiguous position, as if he doesn't quite know how to pin their relationship now. In the episode, Yuta is tutoring Saki in modern literature. They are discussing the 1908 book Sanshiro, written by Soeki Natsume. The book deals with the titular Sanshiro Ogawa and his life while attending the University of Tokyo. While there, he meets a woman named Minako. They are attracted to each other, yet they are both not assertive enough to let their feelings be known to each other, and their romance never develops. Minako gets put into an arranged marriage by her brother, and Sanshiro marries a girl who has strong ties with his family. The book is used to foreshadow a potential future for Yuta and Saki's relationship. We can clearly see, as the audience, from the outside, their feelings are slowly developing for each other. The question is, will they fall in love, or will they fall to the same predicament as Sanshiro and Minako? We also learn, through this study session, a bit more about Saki's personality. She doesn't quite like how Sanshiro doesn't say he's jealous when Minako talks to other guys. She wants people she's close with to state their feelings. She also has a hard time picking up through the text that Sanshiro has fallen in love with Minako. Yuta then asks her if she's ever been in a situation that she couldn't express her true feelings, and brings up the example of if she's ever been in love. Saki responds that she hasn't, and reverses the question on Yuta, to which he responds that he also hasn't been in love, subtly confirming that neither of them have ever been in a relationship. Saki bluntly replies that if neither of them have ever experienced love, their literature grades are preeminent on it, to which Yuta agrees. This scene's purpose was mostly to give a bit more character background on Saki and her attitude towards people not saying what they're thinking. But Ghost obviously used the story of Sanshiro deliberately to mirror the relationship of Yuta and Saki. Now, one of my only gripes with the show comes up during episode 4, and a few other times during the season, where we are taken out of the realness of the world, and the sort of more traditional slice-of-life anime tropes pop in, like with Maya and sometimes Shiori. They're not unpleasant, and they're meant more to provide comedic relief, which they do. However, it kind of takes you out of the realness of the prior scenes with Yuta and Saki, which are my favorite parts of the show. Again, it's not a big complaint, but something I have a little uneasement with. Ghost's commentary is less on episode 4 compared to that of 1 through 3, but there's still a bit to talk about. He mentions firstly how director Sota Ueno asked him if they could put an aquarium in Saki's room. It's original to the anime. Ghost gave Ueno the okay, and then writes how the killfish that Saki has in her aquarium is a metaphor, and even the type of killfish she has meaning, but he doesn't want to reveal it to the audience. He writes how he was very impressed with Ueno's direction and intention with adding this to the anime. I had no idea what a killfish was, and upon doing a little bit of research, killfish have adapted over time to survive out of water, due to living in ephemeral water for so long. Meaning, killfish can survive weeks outside of water, and even their eggs can survive for long periods of time outside of water. I think the reason director Ueno wanted to add this into the anime was to draw a similarity to a fish that didn't want to act like a typical fish, to Saki, who didn't want to act like a typical girl. We are all used to fish having to stay in water all the time or else they will die. But killfish are unique in the way that they don't act or survive the way a normal fish does. Saki is the same way in this nature, how she doesn't want to act like a typical girl would. Her goal is to be both beautiful and smart without having to rely on anyone. After mentioning to buy the Blu-ray version, he goes on to describe how he believes their intention to add in an aquarium is to express Saki's suffocation, but he will talk about that during a later episode. He makes sure to tell viewers to look at the title of the episode's ending song, and how he believes it's a very fitting title. Ghost then comments on how Saki asks Yuta for help, how she closes the physical distance between them very quickly by running at him, which kind of catches Yuta off guard. He believes this is an expression of Saki not being accustomed to relying on others, so she isn't as familiar on how to do so. He makes sure to state that whenever Saki keeps her distance, or tries to get close to someone, she does both in extremely bold manners. Ghost goes on to reveal a bit more backstory for Maya, Saki's only friend. She's apparently extremely smart, stating she'd be able to pass the entrance exams to Tokyo University. She has a much different personality compared to others at the school, which is a bit more prestigious, meaning most people there are more serious on learning, while Maya still tends to be a bit more laid back and goofy. She is a natural communicator, and her concern for Saki comes from her ability to observe and read people closely. She tells Yuta she notices that Saki is changing for the better upon meeting Yuta, and encourages them to continue to develop their relationship. Ghost gives the same kind of commentary to Shiori. He describes her as someone who is talkative, and finds that after trying many different hairstyles, keeping it long and black suits her best. People often get the incorrect impression of her due to her clean and proper appearance, but in contrast, she likes to make crude and inappropriate jokes, as we've seen. She gets bothered by people not liking her true self, and that they wouldn't assume from her outward appearance, so she only shows it with people she's close to, like Yuta for instance. Ghost concludes her section by stating that more of Yuta and Shiori's relationship will develop and be explored in episode 5. Ghost explains how he believes lo-fi hip-hop was the perfect genre of music for Saki to listen to for studying, and loves the song used at the end of the episode. The official Gimai Seiktasu YouTube channel even has an hour-long lo-fi hip-hop video on it, which I think is pretty cool. He ends his commentary with talking about the ending animation, how it was created by a filmmaker named Hiwa. They used a special technique to create 3D animations with watercolor mixed in. According to director Ueno, we aren't supposed to know if the person in the ending animation is Yuta or Saki, but it's supposed to be a representation of Yuta and Saki. He then explains how everyone who has worked on their version of Gimai Seiktasu has their own underlying theme. Ghost has his when he wrote the light novel, Ueno has his when he directed the anime, and Hiwa has theirs when they created the short. Ghost believes this is what it's all about, telling a story in each person's own unique way. Episode 5 is titled Late Night Show and the Real Deal. As stated before by Ghost, Episode 5 primarily deals with Yuta and Shiori's relationship. I will say that although I do like Shiori, the main reason why I enjoy this series is because of Yuta and Saki's relationship and the dynamic between the two. Although I didn't think Episode 5 was bad by any means, it was by far my least favorite so far while watching. The episode opens with Akiko letting Yuta know Saki is still asleep because she was up late last night studying. We cut to Yuta and Shiori working at the bookstore, where they discuss a book titled A Rift in the Blue Night. They learn that the book has been adapted into a movie that they go both see that night. Prior to the movie, there's a bit more banter between the two, which does have a small flirtatious undertone. It's clear that they both get along very well, and I really like Shiori's personality and how well she can give and take a bit of the comedy. I do think Ghost wrote her very well. The movie that they go see is about a boy who meets a girl who has an old mysterious violin that is wanted by some bad people. It's kind of cool just to see a small portion of a completely unrelated, fake animated movie put into a regular anime episode. I'm not sure I've seen or know of any other shows that have done something like this outside of just a few seconds. After the movie concludes, Yuta walks Shiori back to her car. On the way, they stop at a vending machine, and Shiori recites a line from the movie that they just saw, to which Yuta responds with what was said in the next line of the movie. I think this scene, in a way, was a test to see what Yuta's reaction would be by Shiori. Remember, Shiori is the type of person who only reveals her true self to the people she's close to, and Yuta seems to be the only person she is very close to. We also know Shiori is the type of person who likes to joke around, and imitating a scene like this, trying to get someone to play along, would determine if they truly understand her, to which Yuta does, and he passes Shiori's test. Shiori comes to this moment of realization, and in the process of possibly confessing to Yuta, she's interrupted by the vending machine next to them. I really have to hand it to Katakawa here. They can really innovate on the classic confession interruption trope. After Shiori finally gets back to her car, we can see that she grieves about this for a little bit. We then move to a scene where Yuta and Saki are eating and conversing together about the movie and Shiori's test. Saki flatly asks Yuta if he and Shiori are dating, but Yuta denies this claim. He insists that they are good friends, and since they both like books, they have a lot to talk about. Saki responds to this statement by saying that she should start reading more, a subtle way to try and win more brownie points from Yuta. The next scene plays out in the bookstore again with Yuta and Shiori, but this time, Saki arrives to look for the A Rift in the Blue Night book. Saki finally meets Shiori, and Yuta helps her find a book and a study guide to help her study for her exam, along with another book Yuta recommended to her. Saki ends this conversation by telling Yuta he looks good in his apron. So not only do we have Saki now wanting to read more to appease Yuta, but she's now telling him outright he looks handsome. Yeah, things are developing quickly. The final scene of this episode has Shiori explain to Yuta that Saki could be the quote-unquote real deal, implying that he and Saki should date. Now, on to Ghost's commentary. Frankly, he wrote a lot for this episode, so I'm going to try and cover as much as I can, but I may gloss over a few parts. Remember, the mega thread with all of his full uncut commentary will be linked in the description. Ghost begins by mentioning that this is the Shiori episode, and he would like to publish a novel or a novella about her backstory at some point, because he has a lot he wants to say about her. In his commentary, he has a section titled, Why is Shiori Yomiuri attracted to Yuta? And goes on to explain why. He writes that in order for us to focus on the relationship between Yuta and Saki, a lot of the rest of the story is omitted. For this reason, because a lot of the context is missing in the anime compared to the light novel, it may be difficult for some to understand why Shiori is attracted to Yuta. However, Ghost goes on to explain how even if the reason cannot be understood precisely, the work is complete if you can accept that it's just the way it is. He continues with stating that the biggest reason why Shiori is attracted to Yuta is because he, quote, hits back with interest. Whether it be flatly, firmly, or with jokes, textual lies, innuendos, gruff, trivia, or book talk. According to Ghost, Shiori has the complete opposite personality of Saki. Saki does much better with serious talk rather than jokes, while Shiori does better with jokes rather than serious talk. And because Yuta is able to communicate with both so comfortably, it's evidence of his flat attitude towards everyone. Ghost goes on to give a bit more context on Shiori's upbringing. She was always playing with boys and was immersed with boyish communication. This continued up until high school, where the gender gap became bigger, and she made fewer friends and became more lonely. This allowed her to seclude herself into reading books, and she became a book lover. She went to an all-girls middle school and high school, and now university. And although she still has some contact with men, such as on blind dates, she usually gets bored pretty quickly, and her jokes wouldn't land around them. This wasn't until she met Yuta. She became comfortable spending time around him because he treated her without any assumptions, and she came to like him. It should be noted that even though none of this is outright stated in the light novel, because the light novel is meant to be specifically about the relationship of Yuta and Saki, it still exists. According to Ghost, animating the movie inside the episode was kind of a gutsy move, as the light novel didn't have much detail on it. He writes, quote, "The fact that there are many scenes in the film that seem to have movement is a directing intention because it is a still film. But I think you can see that if the staff had intended to direct movement, the film would have been so action-packed. However, even in the main show, the movement in the OP are tremendous, and if you can imagine the difficulty of everyday life, I think that it's actually a work with a lot of movement in the smallest details. By the way, why did they dare do this movie at such a larger scale? I did not ask the production team about this, so it's completely my guess. But I think it was probably because Yomiuri Senpai liked it so much. It goes without saying, but it's no good if Yuta and Yomiuri Senpai get together. That would be a different story. However, by implying the if of the relationship between Yuta and Yomiuri Senpai in this movie within a movie, it's possible to sublimate that feeling. That's why we were able to create the movie within a movie to this extent. Director Ueno and staff members, I apologize if I'm wrong. I will delve a little further into the reasons why I came up with the anime staff members like Yorimuri Senpai too much theory in the following about the only 6 months to live comment section. He then goes on to talk about Yuta and Shiori's conversation after the movie. He puts aside the worries of people that Shiori actually only has 6 months to live, but confirms it was just another one of her jokes. He in fact calls it her worst joke in history, and confirms in the light novel that she apologizes, stating the joke was bad. But what's interesting is how different the response of Yuta is in the anime compared to the light novel. In the anime, he responds with, "Let's go, there's still time if we want to leave now," like in the quote from the movie. But in the light novel, he says, "How serious are you? How much of this is a joke?" In Ghost's mind, Shiori was testing Yuta in how he would respond. If he responded in a joking manner back to her, she would have confessed her love to him there. But immediately after she said what she said, she regretted saying it, which is why she responded with saying it was a bad joke. But this is contrary to the anime, in which Yuta did respond to how Shiori wanted him to. But we now know that as she was about to confess, the vending machine ruined it all. He responds with his thoughts that the animation studio liked Shiori a little too much, which is why they changed this scene so much to favor her a bit more, although the outcome was still the same. Ghost mentions Shiori's backstory that isn't told in the novel, but he did tell to director Ueno, and goes in on a bit more detail concerning Shiori and how, because of feeling maybe slightly threatened by Saki, wanted to move her and Yuta's relationship forward. But like how Saki isn't good at asking for help, Shiori isn't good at having serious conversations, which is why she opened with the line from the movie with her talk with Yuta. A very interesting insight from Ghost. Episode 6 is titled Sweet and Sour Pork and Rain. We see Yuta, Saki, and Maya walking to Yuta and Saki's home together, since Saki invited Maya over to help her study. While studying, Yuta offers to make dinner for them, but embarrassingly isn't able to figure out the recipe. Maya offers to help, to which Yuta reluctantly agrees. We then get a montage of Maya and Yuta cooking, while Saki studies over some really calming music. I know I've said it previously, but the music is such an underrated part of the show. The music is apparently done by an artist under the name of Sitoka, or Satoka. I couldn't find much about the artist, but apparently this is the first production of any kind they've worked on, and I can say that they've knocked it out of the park with their soundtrack. I'm really impressed with how well fitting the music is within the anime. Anyways, afterwards, Maya pressed Yuta a bit on his relationship with Saki, questioning if anything was really going on between them. Yuta replies that there would be trouble if there was something going on. Maya responds how they aren't even blood related, basically strangers. Yuta then asks Maya why she is so curious about their relationship. Maya says that she isn't really sure, but feels that Saki has changed recently, bringing up examples like how she's using more perfume, and alludes that to only someone who is conscious of someone that they have in mind would be using more perfume. Yuta doesn't really seem to care or pay attention to what Maya is saying during all of this. Maya clearly wants something to happen between the two of them, and is questioning why Yuta wouldn't make the move. Yuta responds by saying that when you live with someone of the opposite sex, you're going to be more mindful of your smell, which Maya thinks is kind of a cop-out answer. Maya and Yuta continue this runaround of questions and non-answers. One of my favorite lines comes from Maya's response to Yuta saying, "If you keep hounding your friend about that, she's really going to get annoyed." And then Maya says, "Too late, Saki's already really annoyed with me." It kind of adds to that real-life meta-comedy that I really like. The dinner scene, which follows after, doesn't add much, but it's just them talking about Saki's tests and study methods. It isn't until the very end where Saki compliments Yuta's cooking and thanks him numerous times. Normally, I wouldn't think twice if a scene like this were to come up in any other anime, but the deliberative dialogue of Saki commenting on the delicious food and thanking Yuta multiple times goes to show how appreciative she is not only for the food, but also for helping her study. Afterwards, heavy rain begins to come down after Yuta arrives home. During this, he tries writing a text to check in on Saki, but notice how many times he writes and rewrites the text, trying to find the right words to say to check in on her. He is clearly worried about her during the rainstorm, and if the test went alright. Eventually, he decides to try and find her, only for them to run into each other in the elevator to their apartment. Saki shows Yuta that she got a 94 on her test, but she's a little disappointed that she didn't get higher than a 96 like Yuta. Saki then begins to list out all the things Yuta did for her in helping prepare for the test, like the music recommendations, how to read modern literature, and helping make dinner. Yuta rebuffs these statements by saying that they aren't that big of a deal. Saki responds that to show her appreciation, she's going to make the most elegant meal she can for him, but then teasingly asks him, "Or do you feel like only you can lean on someone older than you?" This Saki arc of learning to rely on others comes full circle with this statement. We see that when she learns to ask others for help, it pays off, and she's willing to do it again. She knows Yuta is the same way in this regard, how he doesn't like to rely on others, which is why she poses this question to him. She alludes this to Shiori because she's older than Yuta and believes that she's the only one he really trusts to have his back, but wants to see if he is willing to rely on her, his little sister, too. Yuta accepts this proposition to consider this mission of getting Saki to pass her exam a success. We end the episode by learning that it is now summer break, and Saki has gone to Yuta's bookstore to interview for a job there. Ghost's review of this episode is a bit more brief. He points out that Maya teased Yuta and Saki to become a YouTube couple to make videos and make lots of money during their walk home. He notes that it has little to do with the progression of the show, but it's the type of conversation that happens in everyday life, which I absolutely find true. I could definitely see it happening, and I've probably heard some of my friends say the exact same thing. Ghost makes sure to mention that the reason Saki and Akiko were usually the ones cooking isn't because that they were forced to by Yuta and Taichi. It's because Yuta and Taichi didn't really know how to cook. Their cooking often came from microwave-ready dishes, but thanks to Maya's help, Yuta now has a bit more practice on how to make a home-cooked meal. Ghost also gives a bit more backstory on Maya. The reason why she left without eating the cooking is 1, because she wanted to leave Yuta and Saki alone, and 2, because her parents are always busy, so she is responsible for taking care of her younger brothers. She oftentimes does not hang out with friends after school because of this, so going to Yuta and Saki's house was something special. This context was cut out because of the time restraints, and it doesn't really play a role into Yuta and Saki's relationship, which makes sense, but I still like hearing a little bit more about the backstory of some characters. Giving some more insight into the weather, Ghost writes that in recent years, Tokyo and Shibuya have experienced some really heavy rain and lightning during the summertime. It's apparently a very real thing that family members are delayed returning home due to the rain, and it can oftentimes be life-threatening. And according to Ghost, Saki wanting to make a meal for Yuta comes from a sense of guilt that there is an imbalance in their exchange for one another. She feels that Yuta has done too much on his end that she has to repay him for, in an equal way to restore balance, or even tip the scales more in her favor. This is where the line, "I always give more than I take," from the anime comes in. Ghost then writes how he likes the feeling of subverting expectations with how Yuta and Saki met in the rain. It wasn't some heroic standoff where they meet each other on the hill with a great view. It was just them running into each other and standing in a closed elevator, a scene which I really loved. Not just of what was spoken during the scene, but how it feels very intimate with both of them in a closed-off space. He also adds that there is a metaphor with the elevator, and how it's a small closed-off space similar to how our brains are a small closed-off space, and how elevators are also used to carry people to new destinations, kind of like how Yuta and Saki's relationship is developing. He ends his writing by stating that the charm from episode 7 onwards accelerates. To quote the translation, it becomes a lot more wow, then geez, then oh, then oh. He cites that this will be the most delicious part of the show. I really liked episode 6. There was a lot more development between Yuta and Saki, which I always love, and it got me to like the character of Maya a bit more too. She's much more expressive and eccentric compared to the other characters in the show. Even her design is a lot more atypical from Yuta or Saki or even Shiori, but I think she adds a more traditional comedic relief we are used to seeing in other slice-of-life anime, which I am open to. Episode 7 is titled Feelings and Summer Vacation. This marks the unofficial second half of the season. The episode opens with Saki's diary, recounting her thoughts across the past few days, and what happened in the last episodes from her point of view, including how she's grateful to Yuta for helping her study, and his music recommendation. She then self-reflects on why it bothers her that Yuta got the music recommendation from Shiori, clearly not accepting the small amount of jealousy she feels from this. The Saki diary entries are always really interesting to read, because although the viewer may have some sort of sense as to what Saki is thinking, reading her own personal writing adds more to her character and can even reveal things that we had no idea she was thinking about. A good example of this is Saki deciding to study in the living room instead of her bedroom to greet Yuta when he gets home, but finding out she fell asleep before she could greet Yuta, but he still put a blanket around her. I also want to take some time to mention the visuals during this part of the episode are really cool. Saki is associated a lot with water, which is a deliberate choice. If you remember earlier, Ghost said that director Ueno wanted to symbolize Saki drowning, which is why there are so many shots of her around and in water. Her writing continues with Saki feeling embarrassed and questioning herself as to why Yuta has so much control over her thoughts and actions. She does come to realize at the end, though, that she is the one doing it to herself. The diary section concludes with Saki contemplating on writing down the one word she's feeling but is too conflicted with doing. Then she asks herself one question. Describe the nature of the unpleasant feelings you're experiencing in one word. This word, in my eyes, was going to be one of two things, either love or jealousy, and we finally find out at the end of the episode. I really loved the opening for this episode, and it took up nearly half of the runtime. It really opened our eyes more to the struggles Saki is facing, and for me at least, changed my view of how much Yuta means to her. It seems like, in the last month or so, her appreciation of him has grown exponentially, which is shown in her writing. I'm very excited to see where we get taken to next in the story. In the following scene, while the whole family's having dinner, Taishi asks Yuta and Saki why they are working and studying so much during summer vacation when they could be out having fun with friends. Both kind of give the same answer, that they don't really have a lot of friends, and none of them made any big plans. Later, they both reinforce the idea that they like to stay alone in solitude, and how they will only make plans with very close friends. We eventually make our way to the bookstore, where Yuta, Saki, and Shiori now all work together. On their walk back home, Yuta and Saki converse about how Yuta helped Saki find a book for a customer. But there's also another subtle conversational dynamic that plays out. At the same time, they both say completely opposite opinions. Saki states that fall is here, but Yuta says that summer isn't over yet. They're both confused by the other's response. Saki questions Yuta if he came to his conclusion based on the weather, whereas Saki came to hers by noticing how the clothes in the store window had finally changed. I honestly didn't know how to interpret this scene when I first watched it. There's obviously some underlying context regarding how Saki notices certain things versus how Yuta notices others, but I was really curious to see Ghost's note on this. And I was going to add how I didn't understand the scene where they talk about going to the pool, where Maya invited Saki and Yuta, thinking Saki was going to tell Yuta but didn't. Saki asks herself the same question she did at the end of her diary section. She answers it with the word jealousy, and it made that scene make sense instantly. Now, let's get to Ghost's commentary for this episode. He answers the question as to why Saki isn't good at taking tests regarding modern literature, and why she had to study so much for her retest. Saki gives the explanation to Yuta that she isn't good at understanding characters' feelings, but in her diary she goes a bit more into detail. She, quote, just can't deal with the problems of the human mind and pass them by, and she tends to take them very seriously and has to think about them. You can solve the modern literature test, even if you don't understand the human mind. However, Saki, who was not very good at making the decision to move on without understanding, was not able to solve the test in this way, and she ran out of time and did not get a great score. Ghost also talks about how Saki, like she mentioned in episode 1, doesn't like her picture or video being taken, which is why there is a quick scene of her and Maya fighting over it during the diary section. You can even see this in the title sequence as well, where she holds a book to cover her face while somebody is videoing her. He does say that there is a bigger reason for this, but says that he cannot reveal why yet. He then discusses the lies Saki told Yuta as to why she was coming home late and why she didn't respond. He writes, quote, Saki's value system is that it is important to verbalize and disclose your feelings without holding on to them, which is why she was unable to understand why the protagonist in Sanshiro did not express their honest feelings in words. However, during the past week, Saki has been lying to Yuta. Instead of honestly disclosing and reconciling her blurred feelings, she's been blurring them in her own mind. This is, of course, an output that goes against her own policy. He then goes into detail and admiration about director Ueno's portrayal of young Saki in her mind, and I agree with him. I thought it was very tasteful and very well illustrated. He describes water as a stifling place for people. There is a difference in Saki's mind to how she interacts with the world as a child and to how she does currently. As a child, she's able to interact with the world around her more than she can now. We also get Ghost's thoughts on the fall/summer conversation scene between Yuta and Saki, and after his explanation, it makes a lot more sense, and I'm not sure how I couldn't connect it before for some reason. In the previous scene, when Yuta helps Saki find a book, he is able to find it because of how he remembers specific details on when a book was newly released and at the top of the display. He remembers that the book the customer was looking for was older, so it possibly could be hidden under the newer books, and he was correct. Saki deduces that Yuta is very attentive to detail, but is surprised then that Yuta didn't notice the change in clothes on the display window. So she concludes that Yuta is really only attentive to specific areas. Ghost ends his notes with saying that there is something amazing coming in terms of Saki's cuteness in episode 8. Episode 8 is titled A Response and Hot Milk. It opens with a flashback of Saki and Akiko from many years ago. Aki asks young Saki if she can hold off on having ice cream so they can enjoy a beef stew she was planning on making for dinner, to which Saki agrees. After the opening, we cut to Yuta and Akiko having a conversation in their home. This is the first time, I believe, this season we see this happening. It's a nice touch, I think, to add in a scene like this to show the assimilation between the two, now that it's been a few months since they've become a family. Yuta asks Akiko a question on whether Saki likes it when people distract Saki from something she wants to do, giving the example of planning something without her input and asking her to join. Akiko responds that given her personality, no, she would not like it very much. She is someone who likes to oversee and plan everything from start to finish. From Yuta's response, we can tell he already knew this, but Akiko's answer gives him all the more confirmation. Akiko then teasingly asks Yuta if he planned on taking Saki out on a date, to which Yuta vehemently denies. They continue to talk, where Yuta relays some observations on Saki's behavior, how she pushes herself too hard and always seems to be on guard. Akiko deduces from what Yuta said that he might plan on taking her out to do something fun, while also lamenting that how she used to act now may have been due to how busy she was when Akiko was younger. While this dialogue comes up, Akiko is directly looking at the ice cream she's eating, which ties into the opening scene of this episode. The personalities between young Saki and the Saki of today are polar opposites. When Saki was young, she was much more expressive and had more emotion, but we can obviously see something in her behavior has changed in that time since, and Akiko isn't oblivious to it either, and somewhat blames herself for it. Lines like, "She's growing up too fast," and "I wish I could have given Saki a little bit more time to be a carefree child," absolutely reflect this. We get very little of Akiko's screen time during the season, but the little that we do get is great. She really seems like she loves Saki, and also Yuta and Taichi as well. And not only that, but she is aware of some of the mistakes and faults she's had as a mother raising Saki. Akiko then asks Yuta for a favor, to help make sure Saki takes a break every once in a while. Yuta obliges, but says Saki might hate him for pestering her. Akiko says that if it comes to that, she'll let Yuta in on a secret of what Saki's favorite thing in the world is, so he can use it as forgiveness. Yuta eventually decides to go to the pool, possibly thinking that if he goes, Saki will ask to go as well. When asking Saki for Maya's contact information, however, Saki is very blunt and cold in her responses, which leaves an awkward tension between the two. In the next scene, Yuta and Shiori are walking together and conversing, and we eventually see Saki spot them. At first, she looks surprised, but quickly smiles to mask it. This then leads into a small montage of both of them working together at the bookstore, and Yuta reflecting on some of their past conversations while walking home alone. Eventually, once they're home alone, Yuta spills the beans about his pool plans. He tells Saki that if he said he wanted to go, she might have gotten jealous. Saki is confused as to why she'd get jealous, and Yuta explains his conversation with Akiko. He then reveals Saki's favorite thing, which is the pool. Originally, I thought it was going to be ice cream due to the opening scene and Akiko's reflection while eating it, but that probably was a little too on the nose for it being the answer. At this point, we can tell from her body language that Saki is a bit embarrassed or uncomfortable, like she's hiding something she doesn't want anyone to know. But I don't think Yuta is necessarily doing anything wrong in this scene. He goes on to explain that Saki seems to act differently when they're talking about Maya. Saki seems to be much more happy when she's around Maya, which is why Yuta wants her to go to the pool with Maya. Saki responds again that she doesn't have the time, she needs to study and can't relax. And Yuta says he's worried about her, which shocks Saki. He says that if she keeps pushing herself like this, eventually she's going to crash. I think the dialogue in this scene is very cathartic for the reader, or the watcher in this case. Yuta was explaining exactly what was on my mind while watching, and I wish someone would say it to Saki. Yuta continues by saying he understands that Saki wants to grow up quickly, but Saki still needs to make time to have fun and relax. Although this may have moved Saki a bit, seeing that Yuta cares for her well-being, she is still adamant in her decision to not relax and to go to her room, but gives Yuta Maya's contact information. The illustration in Saki's room I think is very interesting and deliberate. We first see her fish tank again, but then it cuts to a shot of Saki in the middle of the room, surrounded by a dark blue with a black vignette. This is a clear callback to the drowning metaphor that has been associated with Saki throughout the whole series. In this scene, Saki is clearly stressed about the whole situation. On her desk, we see a cassette tape and decorated cassette boxes. It immediately cuts back to black and fades into a new scene of water reflecting onto the ceiling of Saki's room. It finally ends with us looking at Saki while she stares up at the ceiling. Water has obviously been very heavily associated with Saki during this entire season, but finding out how the pool used to be her favorite thing, and now water is metaphorically her enemy, is very unfortunate to see, but at the same time very good writing. Being able to change something seen as good to bad, and how that came to be, is a trope I love in stories, and I think it's executed very well in this case. We awaken to the next morning, where Yuta and Saki are having another conversation. We find out Saki went to bed very late, and apologizes for not being up in time to make breakfast for Yuta and Taichi. She eventually tries to make something for Yuta. Yuta stops her, and asks if she remembers what they said to each other after they both moved in. It's a big help if we can smooth things out this easily. Yuta tells Saki that it's okay that she doesn't cook for him because she's tired, even to Saki's protest. This type of behavior is something Saki clearly isn't used to, having someone care for her in this way. The episode's title finally comes into play when Yuta offers Saki some hot milk while he's making breakfast. Eventually, they both sit down and enjoy the meal. Saki then brings up that they should go to the pool, which catches Yuta off guard. And even though they're supposed to work that day, Yuta says they can trade shifts with people and will make it work. We cut to a scene of Yuta and Saki walking together. Side note, why does Yuta take his bike everywhere, but we never see him ride it? Like, bro, you're just gonna walk with every girl everywhere. Just leave the bike at home. Anyways, Saki apologizes for being in a bad mood with Yuta yesterday. She then asks Yuta if he's going out with Shiori, and if he is, he wants him to tell her. Yuta tells Saki that they aren't going out, and asks why she thought they were. Saki tells him to just leave it at that, but comments that she thinks Shiori is a great person. Okay, side note number 2. I'm writing the script while I watch each episode, so my comments about Yuta's bike was literally before this next scene comes up, I promise you. Yuta literally breaks the fourth wall and says, "Why in the world did I bring my bike? I don't need it if we're walking together." Saki replies that she figured he must have had some reason, but according to Yuta, it's just out of habit. after credit scene reveals what's on the cassette tapes too. They seem to be recordings of young Yuta and Taichi at the beach. We hear Yuta gathering some seashells for his mother, but also sad that she isn't at the beach with them. Taichi affirms Yuta that they'll all come together some other time. But I wonder why Saki has these tapes. There are only two things I got out of this episode. One, how do you not know your work schedule 3 days from now? And two, how do you agree to plans without looking at your work schedule? But in all seriousness, I think this was another great episode. We got some more development in Yuta and Saki's relationship, and more importantly, we got some self-development for Saki, where she now feels comfortable enough to relax and take a break. Now let's move on to Ghost's commentary for this episode. I guess I didn't pick it up while watching, but according to Ghost, in the opening scene, Akiko saw a child while on her walk home from work, and seeing that child reminded her of a memory of her past with Saki. Ghost also confirms my suspicion that deep down, Akiko isn't super confident that she's done well as a parent for Saki. He goes on to give some backstory details about Akiko that isn't even mentioned in the main light novel. He says that although she currently works as a bartender, she used to work in a more hospitality-oriented or water trade type of job, where her salary wasn't fixed and depended more on the workers' popularity and the clientele. It wasn't until when Saki went to middle school that she switched to bartending full-time. She did this as a way to protect Saki from rumors about her work, even though the bartending does pay less. Ghost then answers the question of why Akiko decided to remarry. He states that both Akiko and Taichi found their situation before their marriage to be less than ideal. But for Akiko in particular, there was a limit to her abilities in raising her daughter with her lifestyle because they both barely saw each other. She and Taichi then decided that marriage would be very pragmatic and benefit both of them due to their situations being similar. Ghost also says that there will be future content related to the conversation Akiko and Taichi had when deciding to remarry. Ghost also talks about the introduction of Fujinami Kaho, the female student we see briefly during the middle of the episode that hands Yuta something he dropped. She does have some small Easter egg appearances in other episodes, and even in the key visual, but she doesn't or hasn't played much of a role in the series. She's introduced much differently than in the light novel, as well, according to Ghost. Yuta and Shiori see her at a golf simulation place, instead of Yuta bringing her up to Shiori. Apparently she plays a very important role in the relationship between Yuta and Saki, so I'm excited to see more of her if that is the case. A lot of what Ghost talks about in the next few paragraphs is about cut content that isn't particularly important to the episode, along with stuff I had already discussed, so I'm going to skip over some of it. However, I did want to mention Ghost's thoughts on Saki's change of heart. Overnight, Saki went from not wanting to go to the pool to wanting to go to the pool. I think this came from her thinking about Yuta's words, and also her preparation of his breakfast. He says that the anime actually does a much more detailed job of the flow of events leading up to Saki's change of heart than in the light novel. He also makes sure to write that although Yuta and Saki care for each other, they don't particularly spend much time together, contrary to what the anime shows. Finally, Ghost ends this episode commentary with talking about the cassette tapes. He says that this element is completely anime original and does not exist in the light novel, but makes sure to say that this is something that would have absolutely existed in the lives of Yuta and Saki, a nod to the great mind of director Ueno. Ghost clearly trusts him and is very appreciative of his anime original contributions. The tapes were in the closet that became Saki's room, and she found them. It's not traditional now, but before, families would make memorial tapes, which recorded a family's history. Ghost compliments how the tapes are an excellent craftsmanship and the brainchild of Ueno, and is a great depiction of Saki creating a connection between her and Yuta, although in this case, it's a younger Yuta, but Ghost still praises the idea nonetheless. Ghost concludes with mentioning how episode 9, the next one, is probably his favorite of the series, and it's also the one that made him the most embarrassed to be the original author. Episode 9 is titled Stepsister and Diary. It opens with a fade into Saki's killfish tank, and an entry from her diary talking about Yuta. The opening line shows a bit of self-awareness from Saki, as she acknowledges her personality is difficult to work with due to her independent nature. But Yuta does his best to work around it to accommodate her. She continues to gush a bit more about him, saying things like how he doesn't have any preconceptions about her, and that he notices all the hard work she does, and tries to hide from others. Eventually, we get to this banger. I'm attracted to him. Which in my opinion would have been a great cliffhanger to leave off on to get the title sequence, but I'll let Ueno cook. The diary entry is detailing the past few days of events, to where we get to be inside the mind of Saki during these events, like when she saw Yuta find the book she was looking for so quickly. She then starts detailing some of the small hints of jealousy and frustration she's had with Yuta being so close to Shiori. We move into the events of the last episode, where Yuta confronts Saki about the pool and her reaction. How she doesn't feel like she can rest or deserves a break. Stuff we already knew from Akiko and what Yuta suspected. But it's still nice to have some confirmation from Saki about it. Although we do learn later, in lines, she regrets what she said and how she said it to Yuta. She describes herself as childish in this moment. She continues by talking a bit more about Shiori, and how she thinks her hair is beautiful, and it suits a man like Yuta, and wonders what type of hair Yuta likes. After going through the motions from the rest of episode 8, we get a flashback that is triggered from Saki commenting how Yuta's face looked like her mother's when Saki asked to go to the beach, but Akiko couldn't afford to. This is a mix-in from the tapes of Yuta and Taichi we hear Saki listening to at the end of episode 8, and she envisions herself in that moment. It's kind of sweet, but at the same time, it's sad to see how these tapes invoke her to create a fake memory of her on the beach when she was young, playing with Yuta and Akiko there as well. I like that Saki actually included Akiko in this fake scenario as well, because it shows that she's also thinking about her mom, and understands the struggles she's had as being a single mother. At the beginning of episode 8, Akiko struggles with the fact that she may not have been a great mother to Saki growing up. But I don't think that's the case. Saki understands the hardships Akiko has gone through and still tried to give her as good of a childhood as possible growing up. But inadvertently, it kind of manifested this independent, reserved, workaholic type of personality within Saki. I also really like this nice art style that they used for the fake memory scene. It's very cool and amplifies the old retro movie projector aesthetic that they shoot for in these Saki diary entries. The flashback scenario is also mirrored while Saki is on the bus, where Saki remembers when Akiko took her to the zoo. We then move into a montage of Yuta, Saki, and Maya, and others at the pool, which is played over the opening theme. There's a bit of Saki dialogue over this as well, talking about Yuta, how she sees some of the stuff in him others don't. We then switch to Yuta's POV while Saki goes swimming, and memories of Saki from prior episodes play during this sequence, along with us seeing Saki genuinely smile and laugh for probably the first time ever in the series. And it ends with this line.
好きだ
I like that they stuck with this flipped perspective, and now we see Yuta on the opposite side of the bus, looking out the window, just like how Saki was while arriving at the pool. Yuta reflects how he was never really great with girls, probably due to how his parents acted amongst each other. He cites that it gave him a very cynical view of relationships between men and women. Yet he is clearly shown outright and stated by himself that he is interested in Saki. On their way back, while talking about the day,
別に
it seems as though Yuta is going to confess until...
綾瀬さん
Yeah, a pretty classic trope in slice of life anime like this. But I'll admit, it did catch me off guard, since there was no mention of a fireworks festival from what I remember. We switch again to Saki's perspective. Inside her mind, she wants to confess to Yuta. She tells him all the things she likes about him, but in the end, she just ends with calling him Big Brother. She blew it right at the end. Come on, Saki. We then get a back and forth between them on the insides of their minds, each of them wrestling with their thoughts on how they like each other. I want to call back to the book Sanshiro, the one that Saki was studying for her modern literature class, because this scenario is very similar to that of the book. Both of them are scared to confess, and both are scared of what will happen if the other one confesses. Determined to not confront these feelings, Saki even goes as far to lock her diary away and throw the key into a river. But the most dramatic change happens in the next scene, where we see her sporting a new, shorter haircut. As many people know, girls cutting their hair is a very symbolic tradition in Japanese culture, symbolizing a new beginning. Her throwing the key to her diary away and cutting her hair is both a physical and metaphorical way to rid her feelings of Yuta. And judging by Yuta's reaction, he might have understood this. In the ending of this episode, Saki explains that she's come to the realization that she can no longer write down her feelings. She needs to act around Yuta just as his stepsister, not a girl. There's even a scene where she hugs a younger version of herself who disappears, seemingly coming to terms with her past and moving on. But I think the very last scene is a bit misleading, because from what it looks like to me, at least, she only threw her key into the fish tank, not the river. Episode 9 was a very good and very pivotal watch for the series. It seems like there is a lot of change coming for Saki, and with 3 episodes left for the season, I'm eager to see how Yuta will react, and how they will possibly mend their relationship in the future. Now, on to Ghost's commentary for this episode, of which he has a lot to say. He writes how Director Ueno is thoroughly conscious of the, quote, sense of distance in this episode. He writes, "It's not the expression, this is the distance between this person and that person, nor is the expression gradually approaching from far away. The director's work expresses the subtleties of wanting to get closer, getting closer, wanting to get away, getting away, wanting to get closer, but getting away, wanting to get away, but getting away." He goes on to say how Saki's nature is deliberately described through the way she moves her hand close to the killfish at the beginning of the episode. Something I didn't pick up on. But Ghost believes it to be a mixture of Saki's feelings of not wanting to get hurt and her fear of hurting herself. He likes how this was portrayed physically rather than straight dialogue. Another thing I like that Ghost pointed out is that in the fake memory scene at the beach, the reason Saki pictures herself and Yuta so young is that he believes Saki imagines that if they grew up together from an early age, these thoughts and feelings she had of him wouldn't have manifested. An interesting detail to notice once it's pointed out. Ghost describes the reason he chose a hippo to be the animal Saki got as a stuffed animal was because he believes Saki finds hippos both cool and cute. It's a bit unorthodox, but it fits with Saki's personality, and she still has a stuffed animal on her bed as well. He then continues by writing about the scene where Yuta acknowledges he likes Saki. Now there's a lot of nuance and important details in Ghost's words, so I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, "In fact, this was the scene I was most worried about when it was decided to become an anime. What? How am I supposed to draw here? And although this is an important scene where Yuta becomes aware of his fondness, the original novel adopts the method that is not often done in the usual way. And we thought this was something that was very incompatible with visual direction. Usually, when a character becomes aware of romantic feelings or undergoes some kind of change of the heart, it's done through some kind of action or event, together with a direction that is easy for the reader to understand pictorially. However, Yuta's realization of his fondness here is almost entirely completed in his monologue, and then he suddenly becomes aware of it in a way that seems to have suddenly emerged. In becoming aware of the actuality, I was convinced that I wanted to portray it that way, and that it was better to portray it that way. However, if the events that are happening were to be visualized as they are, without the monologue, it would look as if he just fell in love with Saki's swimming costume and fell in love with her. I was aware that it was such a disadvantage that the triggers for emotional change were difficult to understand pictorially. But if you're reading this long commentary and feedback, you already know that, don't you? The finished episode should have been perfect, with absolutely no room for such misunderstanding. It was very detailed, yet there was not an explanation, but a video performance, so that you could understand exactly what Yuta was attracted to in Saki, and what happened to Saki that made him realize his fondness for her. Here too, Yuta and Saki's childhoods come alive, as they have been continued to be portrayed in the anime original scenes. In the original novel, Yuta thinks about this just before he becomes aware of his fondness for Saki. And here he gives a quote from the actual novel. When I replied, Ayase-san gave a small smile. Not the dry expression she shows at home, nor the condescending smile she has for her father, but an innocent smile, similar to the one on Ayase's face when she was a child in the photograph. I think deeply that it was a good thing that I forced myself to step in. Cited Gimai Seiktasu, Volume 3, page 203. In other words, he came to realize his fondness for Ayase Saki because he was touched by a glimpse of the innocence that reminded in the cool, dry-looking Ayase Saki. Something that had been lying dormant in her deepest depths. This is because it resonated within him, because it was something that was missing in him, and because it touched the essence of her charm, the person of Ayase Saki. The building up of Ayase Saki's existence, which has been depicted up until this point, and Saki's expression at the pool, her spontaneous gesture, the wind, the sound, the play, everything intertwined beautifully to create the best moment. This is the same feeling as Yuta's, and the viewer's feelings for Saki must have been aroused and gripped by the many things that have happened to her in the past and the image of Saki as a child. Well, I'm very embarrassed to say this, but I've never really liked the heroines I write. Of course, I have the sensibility to think that this girl is attractive, or that she is cute, but I've never had the feeling of falling in love with her from the bottom of my heart. There is no exaggeration to say that since I became a professional writer, there have been almost no characters, not just of my own works, that I have fallen in love with from the bottom of my heart. But when I saw this scene, my mind completely reverted to adolescence. Unconsciously, for a moment, I almost felt like I was in love with Saki. And then I came to my senses. No, what are you talking about? She's a character from your own work. Don't get into it like this one, otaku. How much do you love your own work? Keep a proper distance from it. But well, that's where I had another huff. If you think about it, the TV animation is the work of director Ueno and all of his staff. Then I guess I can get stuck into it. I realized this and successfully became a marginal otaku who wrote strange documents. Part 1 of my emotional breakdown. I also want to add this part that he wrote. Fireworks that the original author forgot to write about. No need for long words. It was good. Very good. Yuta and Saki's faces illuminated by the light of the fireworks, the emotions growing there, The sound was also wonderful. Tension rising, higher and higher, and then Nissan. I was like, wow. It's part 2 of my emotional breakdown. I really like that part from Ghost. He continues by delving a little deeper into the nuance of Yuta and Saki's relationship. Them being step-siblings isn't the only factor, according to Ghost, and neither is that their parents wouldn't approve of it. Because they are step-siblings, and not blood-related, they should be okay with dating. But it isn't what is stopping them from doing so. Because of how both Yuta and Saki have witnessed their parents' relationships deteriorate, they believe that eventually, if they were to get together, their relationship would fail and fall apart. It isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. This kind of connects to the line, "no expectations," that was prevalent in episode 1. Neither of them has any expectations of the opposite sex, and have sort of pessimistic views on love. But both Yuta and Saki want their parents to live happily for the rest of their lives, and don't want their own potential relationship ending to be a force which drives the whole family apart. And now comes the dialogue related to Saki's haircut. Ghost makes the claim that Saki's haircut is supposed to resemble the type of hair she had while she was younger, like what Yuta saw on Akiko's phone. This is supposed to show, without outright saying it, that Yuta now assimilates this new haircut to when she was a child, creating a more sister-like connotation. Saki also believes that cutting her hair will decrease Yuta's attraction towards her, since he seems to like long-haired women, like Shiori, for example, and that having short hair will make her seem more masculine. Ghost also brings up another great point that was discussed during episode 2, how Saki doesn't like to conform to gender roles, yet she is contradicting herself by conforming to the gender roles associated with hair. Long hair is for girls, short hair is for guys. How can masculinity or femininity be defined by something as superficial as hair length, but her own consciousness is being driven by it? When Saki addresses Yuta as Nissan, this is a clear moment where a line has been drawn. This is the stance Saki has taken with Yuta, to see him just as her brother. Episode 9 is a pivotal point in the series, because we don't know where the two will go from here on out. There's still 3 episodes left, and a lot can happen. And those were Ghost's notes on episode 9 of Gimai Seiktasu. Episode 10 is titled Relations and Regrets. This episode opens with Saki and Maya and others preparing for some sort of school festival. We also meet a new character, Ketsuke Shinjo, who seems to have some sort of infatuation for Saki from his introduction. While the others go out for karaoke, however, Saki leaves to run errands and echoes the same line we hear at the beginning of the series. A stepbrother is really nothing more than a stranger. And I think this is trying to be symbolic of the fact that Saki is trying to close the chapter of her life where she liked Yuta romantically. Now with a new haircut and no longer writing down her feelings in her diary, she's trying to revert back to how she acted prior to meeting Yuta, thus the repetition of this line. I like this little detail that they added here of the shot panning towards the flowers. I believe it's trying to imply that they are from Taichi to Akiko, which is very sweet to see, that even if this is a marriage of convenience, they do seem to still really care for each other. Akiko reciprocates this affection by volunteering to do both the parent-teacher conferences for Yuta and Saki, instead of Taichi going to Yuta's. But she is also considerate to both of them by discussing this beforehand with Saki, since she knows that no one at the school knows, besides Maya, that Yuta and Saki are siblings. I'm continuously impressed by the great writing presented outside of the main cast of characters. Akiko is written like a very sweet, considerate, and kind woman, like how a real mother would be in this type of situation. In most slice-of-life anime, you rarely see or interact with the parents at all. And although the spurts of dialogue we get with Taichi and Akiko are short, They leave me impressed and wanting more from them for how great of parents they've been written to be. It's also hinted that one of the reasons Akiko wants to go to Yuta's parent-teacher conference is to kind of fill in that motherly role she wants to be for Yuta. There's a flashback where Akiko tells Saki she doesn't feel like Yuta accepts her as his mother yet. Granted, this is only a few months after they've moved in together, and it might take years for someone to accept you like that, but I think her heart is still in the right place. Upon Yuta and Saki coming to the agreement to have their conferences the same day, for Akiko's sake, there is a bit of back and forth of thoughts between the two about the situation. Saki is happy that Yuta is thinking about her mother's feelings, and Yuta knows that his father wants them to get along, which is why he has to taper his feelings towards Saki. But at the same time, while Saki is trying to do the same, to drown her feelings towards Yuta, this small gesture is making them grow even stronger. Anyways, to be honest, there isn't a whole lot that happens to develop the story during the second half of episode 10. There's some small conversations between Yuta and his dad, and Saki and her friends, and Yuta meeting a girl from cram school at the bookstore. But again, none of it is super important, so I'm going to skip towards the end of the episode. Saki ends the episode by speaking to herself and saying, "If I really wanted to keep my distance from him, I wouldn't make him dinner. I wouldn't leave him a note. That might be the best way to act. But I start to wonder, and it makes me worry. Wouldn't that be more like breaking ties than keeping my distance?" Honestly, another really profound and complicated question to answer, even after what seemed to be a new page turned in Saki's life. She still can't seem to move past her feelings for Yuta. And if she keeps up her current demeanor, is she going to regret it? Now, Ghost's commentary on this episode is pretty brief, and does add a bit in terms of some context to lines or a bit more insight. However, because I don't really feel much of it is relevant towards any discussion pertaining what this video is about, I'm going to leave it out for episode 10. However, like I've mentioned before, all of Ghost's commentary will be linked in the Reddit mega thread down below in the description. But now on to episode 11. Episode 11 is titled Brother and Sister. After the OP, it opens to another family breakfast scene. I'll sound like a broken record by saying it, but I think these are cute. I like seeing the wholesome family dynamic at play. It's not overused, but when it is utilized, they all seem very happy and bounce off of each other very well. It's unorthodox to see in a typical slice of life anime. While waiting for his conference, Yuta meets Maya in the library, where Maya formally asks Yuta if he's into Saki, to which Yuta denies. The reason being because they're step-siblings. Maya then asks if it's okay for her to set Saki up with someone else she knows likes her, which is more than likely Shinju. Yuta covertly doesn't answer this question by telling Maya that it really isn't something she should be asking his permission for. Maya is confused by this, but Yuta stands his ground. Now, from the interactions we've seen already from Maya, she clearly has a vested interest to get Yuta and Saki together. Although her personality is much more energetic and extroverted compared to Yuta and Saki, she also seems to be more emotionally intelligent compared to the two of them. She knows how Yuta feels about Saki and how Saki feels about Yuta, even when she doesn't outright say it. She's told Yuta how Saki's behavior has changed since meeting him. She clearly likes him and doesn't see an issue with them dating, even if they are step-siblings. Maya, in a way, is the character the audience sees themselves through. She knows the thoughts of both of these characters without them expressing it, and knows that they would be great for each other, and is frustrated that they won't take the next step. I think Maya's question to Yuta in this instance is sort of a test. I don't think she'd actually go on and give up on Yuta and Saki getting together so quickly and pass Saki off to someone else. She's probing Yuta to see how he's feeling in the current situation. Another wholesome scene comes up when Akiko attends Yuta's conference, and in that scene, Yuta addresses her as his mother. This makes Akiko very happy, and she tells him that afterwards, and Saki overhears it. Now, during Saki's conference, her teacher at first says she was worried about Saki due to the rumors that were spread about her. However, she now knows that she isn't anything like how the rumors portrayed her. In the next scene, Saki goes to visit a college campus, which happens to be the same one Shiori goes to. And bro, when I first saw this, I died laughing. It caught me so off guard. Like, Saki is just sitting there and the professor is using a hand puppet. Like, what? What is this? Apparently, Shiori has shared a lot of info about her and Yuta to this professor. Or she's just clairvoyant, because she basically opens up with accusing Saki that she's fallen for Yuta. Which I'm not sure is entirely encouraged in the ethics field, but honestly, Saki probably needs to hear it, so I'll let it slide. But Professor Kudo is correct. By ethical standards, Yuta being Saki's stepbrother really isn't someone she should be involved with romantically. Although this conversation takes out the quote-unquote realism element I like so much about Gimai Seiktasu, as I don't think any ethics professor you just met would be hounding you on if you had a crush on your stepbrother, I still feel like, in a weird way, it fits in this scenario. Saki feels like she needs to conquer everything on her own, including her feelings about Yuta. But so far, from what we've seen throughout the series, this hasn't worked. Having someone like Professor Kudo here to kind of confront her in a way that takes her off guard, in my opinion, will help reveal these feelings and a proper resolution for them as well. And this is more or less what happens with the impromptu consultation. I think there is a lot of leeway given to Professor Kudo and how much she knows and how quickly she can pin down Saki's demeanor and personality. And for the context, I think it works. She mentions Saki's style, why she dresses the way she does, why she acts the way she does, and how she gives off a different persona towards the rest of the world. Professor Kudo recommends Saki to engage with a wider variety of people. Doing this might help her find someone that she's drawn to one day that isn't Yuta. But she also tells Saki, if she connects with another person she's attracted to, and her feelings remain unchanged, then those are her true feelings, and she should treasure them forever. These words really seem to resonate with Saki. At the same time, Yuta is having a conversation with Fujinami at the cram school. Fujinami, in the same way, acts as Saki's foil. She isn't very well dressed. She had short hair throughout the entire series. She goes to arcades, and she's a lot more upfront with talking with people. Like when she asked Yuta if he wouldn't hit on her because he thought she was an easy lay. Yet they both appreciate Yuta for having straightforward, unbiased opinions, not presuming how someone acts based on what he's heard of them. And this episode ends with the resonating thought from Yuta, that now he and Saki are finally starting to act like proper step-siblings. Now onto Ghost's commentary for the episode. He starts out by saying that Maya cares a lot about Saki and Yuta, affirming my previous statement. He also says that Maya is happy Saki has recently become more comfortable with her surroundings. But Ghost makes sure to point out, however, that because of how Saki and Yuta have responded to her when she asks them individually if they are in love, she's not sure if she's wrong or if they're just hiding their true feelings. Maya is the type of character who typically would have the trope of smugly knowing more than the two people who know that they are in love with each other, and she does inherit this to a degree. However, it's worth mentioning that she isn't 100% confident, more like 80%. There's a bit of genuine understanding that she could be wrong in this situation. We know she isn't, but it's nice to know that this is what Ghost thinks of Maya when writing her. He also talks about Yuta and Akiko's conversation. According to Yuta, in the light novel, he feels that Saki and Akiko are very different, something we as the viewer can notice from the personalities of the two. He gives a bit more background on Akiko as well, mentioning that she speaks more with sentences rather than words. giving the example of someone saying something like, "I will never forgive you." It's a pretty straightforward sentence, only one way of interpreting it. Unlike the phrase, "I love you so much." Akiko saying this could be teasing or genuine. Akiko creates a specific type of atmosphere when she's conversing with someone, and it's an atmosphere that doesn't change whether it's at home, or in private, or out in public. In the light novel, Yuta mentions how his biological mother is much the opposite in this regard. Ghost goes on to give a bit more backstory on Professor Kudo now. Although she is an ethics teacher, she apparently studies sociology, but her interest shifted towards ethics and philosophy when she went to university. Also, the puppet she's wearing during the conversation with Saki are indeed original to the anime. The animal is apparently a hedgehog, soft on the inside, spiky on the outside, a clear metaphor towards Saki. The conversation lasts a lot longer in the light novel, but due to the time restraints of the anime, it had to be cut down. Ghost also has a brief section on Fujinami Kaho, the girl Yuta ate lunch with. She works during the day and takes night classes and wanders around downtown afterwards. There isn't much more Ghost wrote about her, but it seems like she will play an important role in the possible future seasons. And that is the end of Ghost's notes on episode 11. Overall, it was a nice episode. I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting from 10 and 11, but so far they felt a little more empty compared to the rest of the series. I get there is supposed to be some sort of tension that we're supposed to witness between Yuta and Saki, growing apart and moving away from their more intimate relationship. And these episodes haven't exactly been bad, but maybe not as entertaining as the first 9. Regardless, we are on to the finale. Let's jump right into episode 12. And here we are at the finale of the season, which is titled "And." It starts with an opening line from Saki. What if the difference between being good or bad at a subject isn't a matter of knowing the wrong answers, but knowing how to find the right ones? She continues on by talking about the concept of give and take, how it's better to admit your shortcomings and rely on someone than work on it all yourself. Leaning on someone is a skill one has to learn, and over the past few months, this is a skill Saki has come to embrace. After the introduction, which isn't accompanied by the normal title sequence or song, we cut to Saki out with Ketsuke. And unbeknownst to them, they're spotted by Yuta, who's out to lunch with Kaho. Kaho begins questioning Yuta if the problems he's been facing have anything to do with love. She's deduced it by saying that it makes sense if he came seeking refuge with another girl. Searching for new love helps to escape the pain of a previous experience, which almost one-to-one matches Yuta's situation, even if he isn't conscious of it. Yuta responds back, not denying it. He confirms he fell for someone, but it isn't someone he should have fallen for in the first place. He wants to forget these feelings, but isn't sure if he can. In response, Kaho invites him out. We then immediately cut back to Ketsuke and Saki, where he just confessed his feelings to her. But unfortunately for Ketsuke, Saki rejected his advancement. She even confirms with him that she doesn't have a boyfriend, and she doesn't have a crush on anyone, but it still wouldn't work out. We cut again to Kaho and Yuta talking on a rooftop. Kaho mentions that Yuta reminds her of her old self, and it pisses her off. She explains to Yuta how she lost both of her parents in an accident while she was in middle school, and apparently, both of her parents' families opposed of the marriage from the beginning. She continues by saying that at the time, she never felt anger or sadness, but more like resignation, like giving up. That was until her aunt, who adopted her, helped her overcome that feeling. Kaho asks Yuta if he thinks he can overcome those feelings he's had. It isn't until she says the line, "I mean, we're all human. We can't help having expectations," which kind of snaps Yuta awake. Expectations are a huge theme in Gimai Seikatsu, whether they be familial, gender, or role-based. In society, these are rules, regulations, and of course, expectations of what you're supposed to do to function. Normally, in a family, there are expectations of kids, parents, and siblings. But with Yuta and Saki's situation, it's different. They didn't grow up together, and they never had a sibling before. They don't know how to act because they don't know what the expectations are. That's why Saki says to Yuta she doesn't have any expectations of him, so he shouldn't have any of her. The word has been repeated constantly throughout the series so far, so it makes sense that Yuta thinks of Saki when he hears it. The next scene is probably my favorite from the entire show, and I really want to play it for you all so you all get the full experience. So if you haven't watched Gimai Seikatsu for whatever reason, especially episode 12, this is your spoiler warning. Hello, Neil from the future editing this video here. Yeah, I am not going to be able to show the clip, unfortunately. It's just too long, and YouTube's copyright detection system flags it. And I tried to do a few things to maybe, I don't want to say circumvent, but to try and allow it to be played. I even filed a dispute, which Katakawa unfortunately denied. But yeah, that's how it goes. So if you do want to watch that clip, it's about 7 minutes, which, that is kind of a long length for an unedited clip. Watch that before you watch the next section and the conclusion coming up. And if you haven't watched it, watch the series beforehand, because I think it helps build up that really, really cool moment, that emotional moment between Yuta and Saki. So yeah, that's it from me. On to the next section. It really is a beautiful and touching and worthy conclusion to the series. And contrary to most slice of life, doesn't end in a kiss surrounded by erupting fireworks. It's a hug and a simple conversation between how two people appreciate and care for each other. And now on to Ghost's commentary for episode 12. Be warned, this is his largest one yet, so there will be a lot. Ghost starts his commentary off with thanking his audience for watching the series, and reading his weekly commentaries. He also states that in the scene where Saki and Ketsuke went shopping, Ghost voices the convenience store clerk, which is a cool little detail. He tells a quick story of how it happened. Apparently, after the recording for the final episode had happened, the sound director came out and told him, quote, he forgot to arrange for a voice actor to play the mob characters, so please help appear in the show and help me out. So they put him in the recording studio and gave him one line to read, which was, thank you very much. He praises other voice actors for how they can do such a good job at such a high level for so often, and he enjoyed the experience. I always love learning about small details like this. Not only does it add a bit more of a personalness to the show having the author contribute in a voice acting role, but I also think it speaks volumes to how much the studio appreciated working with Ghost, which was really sweet. He then goes on to describe Ketsuke, a guy who went to the store with Saki and confessed his feelings to her. He states that he was the character that had to be handled the most delicately, due to the notion that characters who have love for the main heroine, who isn't the protagonist, tend to be disliked by the majority of the viewership audience. I love that Ghost added this detail in because it really is true. Ketsuke, although he didn't have a lot of screen time, didn't seem to come off as a bad guy. He actually seemed very normal. He liked Saki, he told her he liked her, and then when she didn't reciprocate, he took it well and went on. There wasn't any drama, there wasn't any remorse, it was very normal and level-headed. And I'm glad that Ghost wrote him like this, because yet again, it goes against the grain, against the typical trope of he might be someone different in a different anime, who may have not reacted like that, but he would have been plotting to get Saki or Yuta killed, probably. That's all my opinion, but what Ghost said is that, quote, Gimai Seiktasu thoroughly avoids forcibly suggesting a certain impression of a character to the viewer. I think this is because they believe that this leads to a sense of reality that is beyond the axis of realistic or unrealistic. Shinjo should not have been portrayed as a good guy or a bad guy. There is no need to portray it as unrequited love. However, he is just a male classmate who lives his own life, fell in love with Saki, and confessed his feelings to her. His life is his life after all. He didn't confess to her to affect Yuta or Saki's relationship, and he didn't do anything bad to her just because she rejected him. That kind of direction was given during the recording as well, and I felt that the result was a wonderfully even expression of the tone. Now let's move on to what he said about Kaho. We learned from the anime that Kaho's parents died while she was in middle school, and according to Ghost, she used to be much more of a delinquent prior to that. She hung out with bad people and did a lot of actions that wouldn't be considered praiseworthy. But thanks to her aunt who adopted her, she has reformed to a much better person now. Ghost hints that Kaho would be the type of person that both Yuta and Saki would become if they had no one to fill their void with. And the three of them have lost parents in their own way. They each kind of lost faith in humanity for specific reasons. Ghost doesn't reveal the reason why Kaho's parents' relationship was so opposed to her relatives. He leaves that up to our imagination. But he does point out that a lot of Yuta and Kaho's conversations took place in parallel to Saki and Professor Kudo's. Ghost then has a long section talking about the events following Yuta's confession. Most of the stuff is just small notes on the differences between the original light novel and the anime, but I wanted to highlight on one part. He says, quote, I have said before that I wrote Gimai Seiktasu with the assumption that Yuta and Saki are real people, and that I was just writing an autobiographical novel. I also said that director Ueno observed the two of them and made the TV anime out of them. I think that this is reflected in the differences between how Saki's emotions are portrayed in the original novel and the TV anime. Saki, as I saw her through my own filter, wasn't crying, but as I saw her through director Ueno's eyes, she was crying. That's how it was. Or so I thought. When I asked director Ueno later, he told me that he also didn't think Saki was supposed to cry at this point in the first place. He said that as he was cutting the storyboard, the tears just came naturally. Gimai Seiktasu has avoided expressions that suggest one-sided views or emotions on the part of the viewer. This is true of the original novel and the TV anime. So if the tears were intentionally shed because it's the final episode, so let's make it emotional, or it's the climax, so it's better to make them cry, I would have felt uncomfortable. I wouldn't complain that it's different from the original novel, but if I had felt it's just, oh, it's different, I don't think I would have been so hooked on the TV anime version of Gimai Seiktasu. However, Saki's tears were too natural. Saki, who has certainly been portrayed in the TV anime from episode 1 to episode 11 through director Ueno's filter, is crying this scene in episode 12. Saki cried because she was meant to cry, without any intention or forced suggestion to make the viewer cry. That's why, even though it's a different expression from the original novel, I think I, the original author, was able to accept this turn of events comfortably and was moved by it. The word expectations is a word that has huge meaning and connotation within the series. Here is what Ghost's interpretation of the word is. Expectations equals expecting the other person to show you the love you want. Expecting that you'll be forgiven, even if you force your feelings on them. At first, they drew a line by promising each other not to do that, trying to avoid the possibility of being hurt by having their expectations betrayed. But now that they have expectations of each other, They suggest that it's okay to have expectations. That's the flow of emotions in the original novel. The title of the final episode was also under a lot of speculation, because the written title and the word at the beginning is, quote, and, quote. But at the end, it's revealed the actual final title is Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Another cool detail I like that was added. This is, according to Ghost, director Ueno's feelings that Yuta and Saki hope their tomorrows will continue and intertwine forever. He ends his final commentary on Season 1 with thanking everyone from viewers to fans to everyone else of the light novel series and the production team on the anime for creating an extremely faithful adaptation and hopes that people will keep it close to them in their hearts. As I sit here writing this script, and specifically the conclusion to this video, I keep thinking about what message Gimai Seiktasu delivered. There were themes and elements of friendship, roles, and duties of the family, and of course, learning to express your true feelings to the ones you care about most. But I also like to see how the story of Yuta and Saki compares to the story of Sanshiro and Minako from the book that was discussed during episode 4. We know that Gimai Seiktasu takes a lot of inspiration from the plot of Sanshiro, where two strangers who meet and have mutual attraction to each other never really cross the line and eventually drift apart. What sets Gimai Seiktasu apart from that tragic tale is finally being able to overcome the feelings of guilt by relying on others. Both Yuta and Saki don't suddenly realize that they love each other and have this moment of clarity on their own. No, it comes after talking with others and relying on their help when they can finally come to that moment of realization. Gimai Seiktasu is a story about a lot of things, but I think its final message that Ghost wants to deliver to the world is that it's okay to not have to do everything by yourself. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to depend on someone else. And it's especially okay to have expectations for the ones you love. This was truly a once-in-a-lifetime anime that I think more people need to watch and enjoy. Not only is the story superb, but the sound design, music, animation, characters, dialogue, and everything in between enables it to deliver such a strong message that I don't think we've seen before. Gimai Seiktasu, or Days with My Stepsister, is a richly compacted anime that was an absolute pleasure to enjoy this year, and I hope this video allows anyone else watching to appreciate it as much as I did. So thank you. Thank you all for watching. This was by far the largest and longest project I have ever worked on for a YouTube video, so I would greatly appreciate it if you liked the video if you haven't already, and shared it with someone who you think would also enjoy it. I've done a few analysis-type video essays, but nothing quite to this extreme, so if you want more content similar to this, please make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments down below what other anime you'd like me to look at next. That's it from me. But until then, I will see you all next time. In the original novel and the TV anime, Saki, as I saw her through my own filter, wasn't crying, but as I saw her through director Ueno's eyes, she was crying. That's how it was. Or so I thought. When I asked director Ueno later, he told me that he also didn't think Saki was supposed to cry at this point in the first place. He said that as he was cutting the storyboard, the tears just came naturally. Gimai Seiktasu has avoided expressions that suggest one-sided views or emotions on the part of the viewer. This is true of the original novel and the TV anime. So if the tears were intentionally shed because it's the final episode, so let's make it emotional, or it's the climax, so it's better to make them cry, I would have felt uncomfortable. I wouldn't complain that it's different from the original novel, but if I had felt it's just, oh, it's different, I don't think I would have been so hooked on the TV anime version of Gimai Seiktasu. However, Saki's tears were too natural. Saki, who has certainly been portrayed in the TV anime from episode 1 to episode 11 through director Ueno's filter, is crying this scene in episode 12. Saki cried because she was meant to cry, without any intention or forced suggestion to make the viewer cry. That's why, even though it's a different expression from the original novel, I think the original author, was able to accept this turn of events comfortably and was moved by it. The word expectations is a word that has huge meaning and connotation within the series. Here is what Ghost's interpretation of the word is. Expectations equals expecting the other person to show you the love you want. Expecting that you'll be forgiven, even if you force your feelings on them. At first, they drew a line by promising each other not to do that, trying to avoid the possibility of being hurt by having their expectations betrayed. But now that they have expectations of each other, they suggest that it's okay to have expectations. That's the flow of emotions in the original novel. The title of the final episode was also under a lot of speculation, because the written title and the word at the beginning is, quote, and, quote. But at the end, it's revealed the actual final title is Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Another cool detail I like that was added. This is, according to Ghost, director Ueno's feelings that Yuta and Saki hope their tomorrows will continue and intertwine forever. He ends his final commentary on Season 1 with thanking everyone from viewers to fans to everyone else of the light novel series and the production team on the anime for creating an extremely faithful adaptation, and hopes that people will keep it close to them in their hearts. As I sit here writing this script, and specifically the conclusion to this video, I keep thinking about what message Gimai Seiktasu delivered. There were themes and elements of friendship, roles, and duties of the family, and of course, learning to express your true feelings to the ones you care about most. But I also like to see how the story of Yuta and Saki compares to the story of Sanshiro and Minako from the book that was discussed during episode 4. We know that Gimai Seiktasu takes a lot of inspiration from the plot of Sanshiro, where two strangers who meet and have mutual attraction to each other never really cross the line and eventually drift apart. What sets Gimai Seiktasu apart from that tragic tale is finally being able to overcome the feelings of guilt by relying on others. Both Yuta and Saki don't suddenly realize that they love each other and have this moment of clarity on their own. No, it comes after talking with others and relying on their help when they can finally come to that moment of realization. Gimai Seiktasu is a story about a lot of things, but I think its final message that Ghost wants to deliver to the world is that it's okay to not have to do everything by yourself. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to depend on someone else. And it's especially okay to have expectations for the ones you love. This was truly a once-in-a-lifetime anime that I think more people need to watch and enjoy. Not only is the story superb, but the sound design, music, animation, characters, dialogue, and everything in between enables it to deliver such a strong message that I don't think we've seen before. Gimai Seiktasu, or Days with My Stepsister, is a richly compacted anime that was an absolute pleasure to enjoy this year, and I hope this video allows anyone else watching to appreciate it as much as I did. So thank you. Thank you all for watching. This was by far the largest and longest project I have ever worked on for a YouTube video, so I would greatly appreciate it if you liked the video if you haven't already, and shared it with someone who you think would also enjoy it. I've done a few analysis-type video essays, but nothing quite to this extreme. So if you want more content similar to this, please make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments down below what other anime you'd like me to look at next. That's it from me. But until then, I will see you all next time.